The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I'd like to make a statement on the report of the Hillsborough Independent Panel. Today, the Bishop of Liverpool, the Right Reverend James Jones, is publishing the report of the Hillsborough Independent Panel. The disaster at the Hillsborough Football Stadium on the 15th of April 1989 was one of the greatest peacetime tragedies of the last century. 96 people died as a result of a crush in the Leppings Lane terrace at the FA Cup semi-final between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest. There was a public inquiry at the time by Lord Justice Taylor, which found, and I quote, that the main cause of the disaster was a failure of police control. But the inquiry didn't have access to all the documents that have since become available. It didn't properly examine the response of the emergency services. It was followed by a deeply controversial inquest and by a media version of events that sought to blame the fans. As a result, the families have not heard the truth and they have not found justice. That is why the previous government, and in particular the Right Honourable Member for Lee, was right to set up this panel. And it's why this government insisted that no stone should be left unturned and that all papers should be made available to the Bishop of Liverpool and his team. Mr. Speaker, in total, over 450,000 pages of evidence have been reviewed. It was right that the families should see this report first, and as a result, the government and I've only had a very limited amount of time to study the evidence so far. But it is already very clear that many of the report's findings are deeply distressing. There are three areas in particular: the failure of the authorities to help protect people, the attempt to blame the fans, and the doubt cast on the original coroner's inquest. And I want to take each in turn. First, there is new evidence about how the authorities failed. There is a trail of new documents which show the extent to which the safety of the crowd at Hillsborough was, and I quote, compromised at every level. The ground failed to meet minimum standards and the deficiencies were well known. The turnstiles were inadequate. The ground capacity had been significantly overcalculated. The crush barriers failed to meet safety standards. And there had been a crush at exactly the same match the year before. And today's report shows very clearly that lessons had not been learned. The report backs up again the key finding of the Taylor report on police failure. But it goes further by revealing for the first time the shortcomings of the ambulance and emergency services response. The major incident plan was not fully implemented. Rescue attempts were held back by failures of leadership and coordination. And significantly, new documents today show there was a delay from the emergency services when people were being crushed and being killed. Second, the families have long believed that some of the authorities attempted to create a completely unjust account of events that sought to blame the fans for what happened. And Mr. Speaker, the families were right. The evidence in today's report includes briefings to the media and attempts by the police to change the record of events. On the media, several newspapers reported false allegations that fans were drunk and violent and stole from the dead. The Sun's report sensationalized these allegations under a banner headline, "The Truth." This was clearly wrong and caused huge offence, distress and hurt. News International has cooperated with the panel, and for the first time, today's report reveals that the source for these despicable untruths was a Sheffield News Agency reporting conversations with South Yorkshire Police and Irvin Patnick, the then MP for Sheffield Hallam. The report finds that this was part of police efforts, and I quote, to develop and publicise a version of events that focused on allegations of drunkenness, ticketlessness and violence. In terms of changing the record of events, we already know that police reports were significantly altered, but the full extent was not drawn to Lord Justice Taylor's attention. Today's report finds that 164 statements were significantly amended, and 116 explicitly removed negative comments about the policing operation, including its lack of leadership. The report also makes important findings about particular actions taken by the police and the coroner while investigating the deaths. There is new evidence which shows that police officers carried out police national computer checks on those who had died in an attempt, and I quote directly from the report, to impugn the reputations of the deceased. The coroner took blood alcohol levels from all of the deceased, including children, and the panel finds no rationale whatsoever for what it regards as an exceptional decision. The report states clearly that the attempt of the inquest to draw a link between blood alcohol and late arrival was fundamentally flawed, and that alcohol consumption was unremarkable and not exceptional for a social or leisure occasion. Mr. Speaker, over all these years, questions have been raised about the role of government, including whether it did enough to uncover the truth. It is certainly true that some of the language in the government papers published today was insensitive. But having been through every document, and every government document, including cabinet minutes, will be published, the panel found no evidence of any government trying to conceal the truth. At the time of the Taylor report, the then Prime Minister was briefed by her private secretary that the defensive, and I quote, close to deceitful behaviour of senior Yorkshire police officers was, and I quote, depressingly familiar. And it's clear that the then government thought it right that the Chief Constable of South Yorkshire should resign. But as the Right Honourable Member for Lee has rightly highlighted on a number of occasions, governments then and governments since have simply not done enough to challenge publicly the unjust and untrue narrative that sought to blame the fans. Third, and perhaps most significantly of all, the Bishop of Liverpool's report presents new evidence which casts significant doubt over the adequacy of the original inquest. The coroner, on the advice of the pathologists, believed that victims suffered traumatic asphyxia leading to unconsciousness within seconds and death within a few minutes. As a result, he asserted that beyond 3:15 in the afternoon, there were no actions that could have changed the fate of the victims, and he limited the scope of the inquest accordingly. But by analysing post-mortem reports, the panel have found that 28 people did not have obstruction of blood circulation, and 31 did have evidence of heart and lungs continuing to function after the crush. This means that individuals in those groups could have had potentially reversible asphyxia beyond 3:15 p.m, and that is in contrast to the findings of the coroner and a subsequent judicial review. And the panel states clearly that it is highly likely that what happened to these individuals after 3:15 p.m. was significant in determining whether they died. Mr. Speaker, the conclusions of this report will be very harrowing for many of the families affected. Anyone who has lost a child knows that the pain never leaves you. But to read a report years afterwards that says, and I quote, a swifter, more appropriate, better focused and properly equipped response had the potential to save more lives, can only add to that pain. It is for the Attorney General to decide whether to apply to the High Court to quash the original inquest and seek a new one. In this capacity, he acts independently of government, and he'll need to examine the evidence himself. But it's clear to me that the new evidence in today's report raises vital questions which must be examined. And the Attorney General has assured me that he will examine this new evidence immediately and reach a decision as fast as possible. But ultimately, it is for the High Court to decide. It is also right that the House should have an opportunity to debate the issues raised in this report fully. And my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, will be taking forward a debate in government time, and this will happen relatively quickly when the House returns in October. Mr. Speaker, I want to be very clear about the view the government takes about these findings and why, after 23 years, this matters so much, not just for the families, but for Liverpool and for our country as a whole. Mr. Speaker, what happened that day and since was wrong. It was wrong that the responsible authorities knew Hillsborough did not meet minimum safety standards and yet still allowed the match to go ahead. It was wrong that the families have had to wait for so long and fight so hard just to get to the truth. It was wrong, quite profoundly wrong, that the police changed the records of what happened and tried to blame the fans. We asked the police to do difficult and often very dangerous things on our behalf. And South Yorkshire Police is a very different organisation today from what it was then. But we do the many, many honourable police men and women a great disservice if we try to defend the indefensible. It was also wrong that neither Lord Justice Taylor nor the coroner looked properly at the response of the other emergency services. Again, these are dedicated people who do extraordinary things to serve the public, but the evidence from today's report will make some very difficult reading. Mr. Speaker, with the weight of the new evidence in this report, it is right for me today, as Prime Minister, to make a proper apology to the families of the 96 for all they have suffered over the past 23 years. Indeed, the new evidence that we're presented with today makes clear, in my view, that these families have suffered a double injustice. The injustice of the appalling events, the failure of the state to protect their loved ones, and the indefensible wait to get to the truth, and then the injustice of the denigration of the deceased, that they were somehow at fault for their own deaths. So on behalf of the government, and indeed our country, I am profoundly sorry that this double injustice has been left uncorrected for so long. Mr. Speaker, because of what I've described as the second injustice, the false version of events, not enough people in this country understand what the people of Merseyside have been through. This appalling death toll of so many loved ones lost was compounded by an attempt to blame the victims. A narrative about hooliganism on that day was created, which led many in the country to accept that somehow it was a grey area. Today's report is black and white. The Liverpool fans were not the cause of the disaster. The panel has quite simply found no evidence in support of allegations of exceptional levels of drunkenness, ticketlessness or violence amongst Liverpool fans. No evidence that fans had conspired to arrive late at the stadium, and no evidence that they stole from the dead and the dying. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole House will want to thank the Bishop of Liverpool and his panel for all the work they've done, and I'm sure that all sides will join with me in paying tribute to the incredible strength and dignity of the Hillsborough families and the community which has backed them in their long search for justice. While nothing can ever bring back those that were lost, with all the documents revealed, nothing held back, the families at last have access to the truth. And I commend this statement to the House.
Ed Miliband.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement? And I join him in remembering the 96 people who died at Hillsborough, the hundreds more who were injured, and all of their families and friends. I think today we also remember all those who had to suffer the trauma of being there that day. Let me state right up front, Mr. Speaker, an uncomfortable truth for us all. It shames us as a country that it has taken 23 years to get to the truth about what happened at Hillsborough. The Prime Minister was right today to offer an unreserved apology. But all governments during this period bear their share of responsibility for the failure to get to the truth. So we on this side also apologise to the families that we didn't do enough to help. And what brings us here today, as the Prime Minister has said, is not just the tragedy of Hillsborough. It is that the victims of this tragedy and the people of Liverpool were systematically smeared and portrayed as its perpetrators. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, for a moment, any of us waving a loved one off as they go to a football match, and then the impossible grief of your loved one not returning. And then imagine being unable to grieve in peace, but facing 2 decades of torment. A cloud of suspicion, innuendo, and downright lies spread about the person you loved. Lies about rushing the gate, lies about ticketless fans, lies about the drunkenness of the victims. Mr. Speaker, this is what the Hillsborough families have had to endure from day one of this tragedy. And while they spoke the truth to power whenever they could, the powerful did not hear. Mr. Speaker, nothing can compensate for what the families have suffered, but I pay tribute to all of the victims' families for their 23-year campaign for the truth. Without the efforts of the Hillsborough Family Support Group, the Hillsborough Justice Campaign, and Hope for Hillsborough, the truth would have remained hidden, and we would not be here today. I also commend the work of the Liverpool Echo, who kept the campaign going, as well as my right honourable and honourable friends, the members for Lee, Garston and Halewood, Liverpool Walton and Holton. Most of all, I want to pay tribute to all the people of Liverpool and the people across the country who have stood with these families in the dark times and to every single person who campaigned for this day to come. Now, rightly, as the Prime Minister said, it's the families who've had first access to this report. And people will want over many days to properly scrutinise all the documents that have been released, and I welcome the Prime Minister's decision to have a debate in October. But some things have been clear for a long time and will be clearer after the report today. I want to put those on the record. The tragedy was not caused by fans, but by an unsafe ground and terrible mistakes and negligence in policing. There was a systematic attempt by some in the police to cover this up after the event and disgracefully to spread the blame to the fans. They were aided and abetted by parts of the media. And finally, it is clear that the original inquest was hopelessly inadequate, declaring the so-called 3:15 cutoff, assuming that all those who had died had sustained fatal injuries by that time. When in fact the post-mortem records show this not to be the case and tragically show some of the victims could have been saved. So the picture is not one of irresponsible victims, but innocent victims, let down by the South Yorkshire Police, the emergency services, the Sheffield coroner, and the wider public authorities. It is a picture not just of a tragedy, but of a gross injustice. The victims were not only blamed by those who were supposed to protect them, they were blamed by those who were themselves responsible for the disaster. Mr. Speaker, after truth must come the best justice that can be provided 23 years late. Let me ask the Prime Minister, therefore, 3 questions. First, about the possibility of new inquests. Can I welcome what he says about the Attorney General? And can he just reconfirm the urgency that I'm sure he and the Attorney recognise for this decision to be made? Second, today's revelations also raise profound questions about the behaviour of the public authorities and the police. Can he tell us what steps he imagined those authorities might be able to take in response to the panel's findings, and whether he believes there is any way that those responsible can be held accountable? And third, does he agree with me that just as he has apologised on behalf of the government, and so too have Sheffield Wednesday on behalf of Hillsborough, the same should be forthcoming from all those who wronged the victims, families and supporters, including in the media, and particularly the Sun newspaper. Mr. Speaker, this is a day that has been far too long in coming. To the families we say, we are deeply sorry for your loss. We are deeply sorry for the pain you have suffered. We sincerely hope that today marks a day of truth, so that finally you can grieve in peace.
The Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, can I thank the right honourable gentleman for what he said and the way in which he said it. As he put it, this has taken too long, but it has taken all parties to come together and work together to make this happen. And he's absolutely right to commend the local groups, the local press and the local MPs for keeping this issue alive and making sure that we reach this point. As he said, after truth should come justice, and let me try and answer his 3 points as best I can. On the inquest, yes, it is absolutely urgent. We have to look at the Coroner's Act 1987 that says that once an inquest has been held, a fresh inquest can only be held if the High Court quashes the original inquest and orders a fresh one. And the High Court will only consider an application either made by the Attorney General or with the consent of the Attorney General. So that is now the key decision-making role that he is in. He has to stand aside from government to do it, but all the things I said in my statement I think are relevant. In terms of what other authorities are responsible for and whether further steps should be taken, again, we have in this country, quite rightly, independent authorities for prosecution and the rest of it. They will want to study, I'm sure, what is in the report and come to their own conclusions. On the point about apologies, I think he's absolutely right to say what he said. I think the important thing about making an apology is to think very carefully exactly why one is necessary, and in this case it's absolutely necessary. There is new evidence which is absolutely vital in reaching this conclusion. But the other point about an apology is you should only make an apology when you really mean it. And I think there have been, in this, my understanding of this long history, apologies have sometimes been given that have not been fully meant and not been properly made. So my advice to others, and it's for their decision, is think it through, understand really the extent of hurt, not just of the families, but as Merseyside more widely, and then do it properly.
Mr. Stephen Mosley.
I thank the Prime Minister His statement and the release of the papers will be welcome not just on Merseyside but across the country. My right honourable friend is aware of my constituent Mrs Anne Williams, whose 15-year-old son Kevin died on that awful day in April 1989, and her 23-year battle to find out the truth behind her son's death, and in particular to overturn the original inquest 3:15 cut-off time. She's had several requests to the Attorney-General turned down and been as far as the European Court of Human Rights in the past. Now that the independent panel's report has been published, would you encourage the Attorney-General to look favourably into ordering a new inquest into Kevin's death?
Well, I think, first of all, can I offer my condolences again to Mrs Williams and to all the family members affected by Kevin's tragic death. Of course, his death was one of the many that were originally dealt with in this single inquest. And as I've said, now that this report is out, the opportunity is there for the Attorney-General to study the evidence and to make that recommendation to the High Court that I know so many, like Mrs Williams, will want to see.
Mr. Andy Burnham.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for every single word of his statement today. Their value in Liverpool simply cannot be calculated. It comes far too late for many, of course, but finally the full horror of Hillsborough has been revealed. A catalogue of negligence, appalling failure and sheer mendacity. A tragedy that should have been prevented, lives that should have been saved. Devastating truths made far worse, not better, for the passage of time. A crude 3:15 cut-off with no legal, medical nor moral justification. Parents only hearing today what happened to their children because people whose job it was to protect them then turned against the victims and the bereaved to protect themselves. A monumental cover-up and a sickening campaign of vilification against victims, grieving families, traumatised survivors and a city in shock. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that today the names of the 96 and of the Liverpool supporters who were at Hillsborough have been emphatically cleared? And in thanking him and the Home Secretary for supporting the disclosure process I initiated, can I ask him to continue to work with us to right these wrongs and, at long last, to bring justice for the 96?
Well, first of all, I absolutely will continue to work with him on this issue. I think he's right that the names of the 96 have been cleared. But above all, I'd like to pay tribute to the work that he has put in with huge passion and dedication on this issue. I think it was a brave and right decision to set up the panel. Not easy when there have been previous inquiries, previous judicial reviews and the rest of it, but undoubtedly the right decision. And also, I think, for what he's done to help people understand what I call the nature of this double injustice, an injustice about fact, about these dreadful things that happened that weren't properly accounted for, but also the injustice of narrative, the injustice of an inaccurate version put around, which, as he put it quite rightly, has made the passage of time make these things worse, not better.
Simon Hughes.
Mr Speaker, can I thank the Prime Minister for his very full and robust statement and join him in paying tribute to the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Member for Lee, and his colleagues who have helped us get to this place today. I hope the Prime Minister will agree with me that what today's evidence clearly does is vindicate not just Liverpool Football Club and the families and the campaign, but all those who supported Liverpool and the people of Merseyside in saying that football supporters on that day behaved normally and they were abused and vilified without justification. And I hope we've learnt the two lessons. One, that when reports are carried out, as they were for the 2 previous years, into that ground, somebody needs to make sure that they are implemented and not left on the table. And secondly, that it shouldn't take 23 years in this case, or similar amounts of time in the case of the Marchioness, for victims to be able to put their case to the public and for a proper inquiry to take account of all those who have something to say. We don't do public inquiries and inquests well yet in this country. We need to do them much better in the future.
Well, I agree with what my right honourable friend has said. On the specific point about learning the lessons of health and safety reports and safety inquiries, I haven't had time to study everything in this report, but I think there'll be new and detailed evidence about that issue. But on the more general point, I think this is very important, as I said in my statement, for the people of Liverpool, the people of Merseyside, to see that the rest of the country understands why the sense of injustice rightly is as strong as it has been for all these years.
Mr. Steve Rotherham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a momentous day. On behalf of the people of Liverpool, can I thank the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition for their statements of support to the families, supporters and to the people of Liverpool. Finally, we have the undeniable truth, a truth that we know now means many innocent people who could and should have been saved. A truth that unequivocally confirms that Liverpool fans weren't the cause of the disaster and that drink wasn't a significant factor. A truth that both vindicates and validates a 23-year campaign for truth and justice, despite the criticism levelled at us as a self-pity city, that we were right, that there was a deliberate attempt to shift the blame, to instigate a cover-up at the very highest level. It is not about retribution. It's about responsibility. Today, we have made history, but now we must change history. So, can I ask the Prime Minister, will he ensure that the government fully cooperates with any potential police investigations into the actions of senior police officers and civil servants involved in the 1989 cover-up? Will he write personally to the families of all the 96 victims and apologise? And most importantly, I urge the Prime Minister to work with the families and MPs and, of course, the Attorney-General so that an application may be made to the High Court to quash the original unsound accidental death verdicts and to order a fresh coroner's inquest. Only then will justice be seen to be done.
Well, first of all, let me pay tribute to the honourable gentleman who not only was there on that dreadful day, but also has the home of Liverpool FC in his own constituency, and he's campaigned very, very long and hard on this issue, including securing last October's parliamentary debate, which was a key point in this whole developing issue and getting it right. On his specific points, I'll look carefully at his idea of writing to the families. It's been vitally important that they've had this report, before anybody else. I think it's an extremely good idea. Of course, the government will cooperate with any investigation. As I've said, all the government papers that were given to the inquiry, and a full trawl was done, all of those will be published, including the cabinet minutes. That's something that hasn't been done in the cases of peace and war, but I think it's absolutely essential in this case that it is. I think he's right. This is about responsibility. It's also about respect, and I think that's what people have rightly earned today.
Graham Evans.
I would like to thank my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary, and pay tribute to the honourable member for Liverpool, Walton, Lee and Hulton, who were actually at the tragic event. The truth is now out, and it's clear that the families of the 96 were right all along. Can my right honourable friend please make sure that justice is done and justice is seen to be done?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question, and I think he's right that justice is being done by the full revelation of all the documents. As I put it in my statement, obviously you can't bring back those that have been lost, but what you can do for the families is the full revelation of all the facts, all the documents, and in that way people can rightly see that they have access to the truth. It's going to take us all a lot of time to study exactly what has been revealed, but I think from the introduction to the report you can see very clearly, as I tried to outline in my statement, some of the key points the families have been making year after year have been thoroughly vindicated.
Mr. David Blunkett.
Mr. Speaker, could I reiterate appreciation to the panel and the excellent Secretariat, and thank the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition for the words they've spoken and for the apology. The families and the people of Merseyside have known all along that the hearts of the people of Sheffield have been with them, demonstrated on that terrible weekend by the help and support that was given. My own wife, Margaret, treated some of the injured, and I visited others in hospital. No one in their right mind could have blamed the victims for what happened that afternoon, given where they were in the ground and the consequences to them. Could I say to the Prime Minister that in going forward, one of the lessons that has to come out of this is surely that cover-up can only cause and continue to cause the greatest hurt and harm to those involved. And in a democracy, transparency and openness must and always will be the right way forward to get to the truth.
I think the Right Honourable Gentleman makes an extremely good point, and it echoes what my Right Honourable friend for Southwark and Bermondsey said, is that in holding inquiries and inquests, both of which were held in this case, not enough was done to reveal the full picture, and I think that's what this report does. I just reiterate again, I think it's very important that all parliamentary colleagues study the report before making more detailed comments on it, because he mentioned, for instance, the role that people played in Sheffield in helping with those who were injured. And let me just read one small segment of the report. Viewed entirely as an operation to deploy ambulances to the stadium and transport casualties as quickly as possible to hospital, the response was rapid and efficient. But then it goes on to say this ignores a significant component of the response to a major disaster set out in the Ambulance Service's Major Incident Plan, which is the provision of appropriate assessment, prioritisation and treatment on site. So what I'm trying to say is, when it comes to the criticism of the police or the ambulance service or other emergency services, I think it's very important to look carefully at what the report itself says.
Mr. John Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just for absolute clarification, will the Prime Minister confirm that all documentation and all papers relating to this matter are now in the public domain?
It's not quite as simple as that, because basically all the documentation was made available to the panel, and I understand from the panel that they were very pleased with the cooperation they had with everybody, from the government to the South Yorkshire Police to the media. They feel they've been given every document they needed to see, over 450,000 documents. The overwhelming majority of those will be published. The only ones that won't be published, and this is set out in the way the panel was originally established, are those needed for individual data protection. So there will be some documents that won't be revealed, but the panel has set out the process by which that will be judged. And let me re-emphasise, that is a decision for the panel. It's not a decision for the government. We have not held back anything.
Mrs. Louise Ellman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is the day when the 23-year-old campaign, led by the bereaved, the traumatised and the injured, was vindicated. And I pay tribute to the work of the Bishop of Liverpool and his panel in demonstrating so conclusively what had been suspected for so long, that there had been a major and systematic cover-up. Can the Prime Minister give us an absolute assurance that in the three key areas of who was responsible for what happened, on whether sufficient lives were saved, and on the critical issue of the inquest, he will keep Parliament informed about progress that can be made, so that those who are bereaved and those who remained traumatised will at least start to feel they are at the beginnings of receiving some kind of justice?
I can certainly give the Honourable Lady that assurance. I think the panel's done an excellent job, but to be fair to the panel, they are not a coroner. Only the coroner can, carry out a proper inquest. And I think, as I've said, there's very important evidence here for the attorney to consider, to put in front of the High Court. But the panel itself can't reach those sorts of judgments. And in paragraph 60, it says this: it's not possible to establish whether a more effective emergency response would have saved the life of any one individual who died. But then it goes on to say, as I quoted in my statement, a swifter, more appropriate, better focused and properly equipped response had the potential to save more lives. In the end, I think you do need the precision of coroner's reports to go into that sort of level of detail. But I think the panel's done an extremely good job with what they had.
You will appreciate that this day is very significant, not just here in Liverpool, but in the whole nation. And you'll understand too that for the families and the survivors, it's a traumatic time. They have received an overview of the report early this morning, and I should report to you that when they heard the overview at the end of it, they stood to applaud what they had received. But I'm mindful of the death of 96 people, and although it may not be usual practice, we on the panel feel that it would be appropriate to ask you with us to stand at the beginning of this press conference, simply to remember them and the nature of what it is that is being recorded today. Please stand. I'm going to ask my colleagues on the panel if they would introduce themselves to you and also tell you the particular expertise that they bring to the panel.
I'm Professor Phil Scrapen, and I'm in the School of Law at Queen's University, and as some of you will know, I'm author of Hillsborough the Truth and worked on the Hillsborough project in its early days.
Dr. Bill Kirkup. I formerly worked in the Department of Health as Associate Chief Medical Officer and a medical member of the panel.
My name is Christine Gifford, and I'm a specialist in disclosure of information, and I led on disclosure for the panel.
My name is Katie Jones. I'm a television producer and journalist and was the factual producer on the Jimmy McGovern drama documentary.
My name is Peter Sissons. I used to work in news broadcasting. I've been of use to the panel, I hope, in advising on media matters.
My name is Paul Leighton. I was the Deputy Chief Constable of the Police Service in Northern Ireland, and I advised on policing matters.
My name is Sarah Tyek, and I was formerly the Keeper of Public Records for the United Kingdom Government, and I'm the archivist on the panel.
I'm Raj Bhatt, the legal member on the panel, with 25 years experience in areas including deaths in custody.
Thank you. It's been a remarkable aspect of the panel's work that we've been served by people with expertise in so many important areas that are relevant to the panel's task. The 20th anniversary of the Hillsborough tragedy, over 30,000 people came to Anfield. It showed that there were questions still unresolved and that the wound of grief in this city was still open and very sore. When the Hillsborough Independent Panel was set up and first met on the 4th of February, at our first meeting, we met with the three family groups. And indeed, it was their questions which helped shape the report and the direction that we took. Even more importantly, it was their dignified determination that gave us all a common resolve to work together in this task. I had prepared a 20-minute statement to give you prior to your questions, but having followed the Prime Minister's statement, much of what he said has covered the ground that I was going to say, and so I don't want to waste your time by repeating what now is already in the public domain. And so I'm very happy now to invite questions from you to myself through our chair today. Peter Sissons will field the questions and then direct them accordingly. Thank you.
Well, I've been asked to conduct the order in which people speak. If you want to speak, please put your hand up. I'll come to you when I can, and I'll ask you to state who you are and who you're representing. So who's the first? Blue shirt over there.
Hello, it's Paul Kelso with the Daily Telegraph. Can I ask the Bishop whether, in light of your findings made very clearly here about the failings of the initial inquest, whether you believe it's time for those verdicts to be quashed and new inquests to be opened?
It's a very important question because it raises the issue of the nature of the panel. We are not an inquiry. People have not appeared before us. People have not been questioned. People have not had legal representation. Our job has simply been to oversee the maximum possible disclosure of all the documents and to write a report which adds to public understanding. and therefore our terms of reference don't actually allow us to make any recommendations. The documents, in other words, must speak for themselves.
Next. Judith Morris.
Judith Moritz, BBC News. I note from your summary that no contemporaneous documents have been discovered by you surrounding the visit of the following day after the disaster by the then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and Douglas Hurd, Home Secretary at the time, to Hillsborough. I wonder first of all whether you could tell us about your efforts to find those documents and why perhaps you feel that they don't exist. And then as a second part of the question, whether you could tell us whether News International submitted any documentation to you as part of this process.
I'll take the second question first and say that News International did provide us with documents. The most substantial question, your first one, I'm going to ask both Professor Scrayton and Christine Gifford if they will address that particular issue.
The important thing about Margaret Thatcher's visit is that there are contemporaneous documents that set the context for the visit, and there are contemporaneous documents that discuss the preparation for the visit. But that reference is directly to any document that might or might not have existed concerning the actual briefing when she arrived and when she left. My view on that is there was probably no such document. In other words, our conclusions about that visit and our conclusions about the issues that arise out of that visit are drawn from a range of documents in preparation for the visit and post-visit. But I don't think, and I expect you would all know this automatically, I don't think that the kind of document people would be looking for in a situation like that, which would be what was told to Margaret Thatcher on that day, that such a document would exist. She would have been told that verbally, and I doubt if a record would have been kept of it.
But it is your assessment, is it, that she would have been told something? I'm asking because really, I suppose, the question is what the height of this potential conspiracy may have been. The finger from your report seems to be pointing most strongly at South Yorkshire Police, the Police Federation, and even the Chief Constable. But I wonder whether the suggestion you're making is that it went beyond that. You do say, in fact, it went beyond it to Parliament.
What we found out on that day, states Bernard Ingham, was that a tanged-up mob basically forced entry into the stadium. That is the comment that he eventually gives to us in terms of what happened. So that briefing is not a briefing on paper, and I doubt if those words would ever have been used directly. But that is the exact point that I would want to make. It was verbal information that was given on arrival. And I think that to project that any further than that, to think that those kind of comments would have been committed to paper would be wrong. And I'm not too sure either about how this unfolds in terms of an organised conspiracy. I would be very wary ever of using that phrase in terms of the work that we have actually unpacked in relation to Hillsborough. Conspiracy would not be, it's a big word, and it's a word that carries a very deep meaning.
Christine, would you like to add anything about the accessing of material?
Only to say that from my point of view, and I looked at all the material, and as Professor Scrayton said, it isn't just one document. You link in one document with another document and you're putting a jigsaw together, which actually supports the case or doesn't support a case. And it's a very forensic process. From my point of view, there's no evidence that such a document ever existed, that it was, we think, a verbal briefing, that she would have been briefed on her way to Sheffield, and while she was there, clearly. But there's no evidence that a document existed, or that we haven't been shown.
There's a question right at the back.
Dan Freeman from LBC 97.3 and Global Radio. Could you tell us the family reaction to Mr Cameron's apology in the Commons earlier?
Actually, I was sitting in the front row and I couldn't see the faces, but I sensed that there was rapt attention, and especially when he referred to the double injustice and spoke unequivocally, apologising, that this was well received by the families.
Peter Marshall.
Peter Marshall from Newsnight. It's back to the point about Margaret Thatcher and the visit to Sheffield. Bernard Newman was talking about a tapped up mark, and yet from what I've seen in the report, it suggested that Margaret Thatcher had a different view, or viewed the police as being defensive and deceitful. There seems to be a mismatch though, between what her press secretary was saying and what she herself was led to believe.
The defensiveness and deceitfulness comment comes much after. It's not actually relating to that particular moment. It's a reflection that she brings later after the revelations that, in fact, they had been deceitful and defensive. So it's not relating to that actual moment. It's a more broad issue about the way in which the police put their case together in the immediate aftermath, beginning on the morning after the disaster and following through. And the only thing I would want to add on that, which I think is really important, when you actually review the document in full, what you find is that those meetings were recorded. They were not just written up, they were actually recorded. And that demonstrates the extent to which we've been able to access significant documentation from the immediate aftermath.
So the scales fell from her eyes and she realised what was going on?
Well, I think, I'd be the last person to try and second guess what Margaret Thatcher thought, but my feeling is that she realised at that moment, and it was particularly, it was a debate that was going on at the time around the Football Spectators Bill. I think that she was reacting very strongly to the fact that the Taylor inquiry had demonstrated the extent of the deceit. And that is, it's in the context of the Taylor inquiry that she was reflecting on the level and intensity of that deceit.
Would you like to wait for a microphone so everyone can hear you?
Nick Ravenscroft, BBC News. You very carefully worded in the section on the pathologist reports that 28 people had no obstruction to blood flow, 31 people, their hearts and lungs continued to function. 96 people died here in Liverpool interminably. People are going to be asking how many people might have been saved. Now, I know it's a difficult question to answer, but are we talking about a handful, half a dozen, possibly a dozen, maybe 20, maybe 30? Can you give us any reasonably informed ballpark figure about, if they made a better fist of it in responding to the emergency, how much that figure of 96 could have been reduced by?
This is very technical information. I'm going to ask Dr. Bill Kirkup if he'll take your question. Bill.
Thank you. 28 people had definite evidence that they didn't have obstruction of the blood flow. 16 people had definite evidence of the heart and lungs continuing to function for a prolonged period after the crush. In total, 41, though there is some overlap. 41 people, therefore, had evidence that they had potential to survive after the period of 315. What I can't say, because it would take a properly constituted body that the panel isn't, is how many of those could, in actuality, have been saved. But I can say that the potential was of that order of magnitude.
Yes. Owen Gibson from The Guardian. With reference to some of those meetings that occurred with the Police Federation and others in the immediate aftermath of the disaster, I mean, to what extent do you believe that Peter Wright, the Chief Constable at the time, led a concerted cover-up and attempt to smear those facts?
It's important to understand that the panel steered clear of making value judgments. What we were anxious to do was simply to assemble all the documentary evidence that is there. Because people are not able to appear before the panel to make representations themselves, the panel therefore can't make those sorts of judgments. And whatever personal and private opinions we might have, the terms of reference of the panel forbid us actually making those public statements.
Yes. David Conn from The Guardian. Just following up on that point, though, about the police statements, we haven't obviously had time to read the report, but just reading the summary, it is very factual, but nevertheless you're finding it a very deep operation to change statements, to make them favourable to the South Yorkshire Police, and to delete criticisms of support, to emphasise criticisms of supporters. And the South Yorkshire Police case is obviously that they were removing opinion. But do you find, and I know you have to limit yourselves in terms of value judgments, but are you finding that it went beyond opinion and it was therefore an improper process of amending the statements?
I'll ask Professor Scraton to speak in detail to this, but one of the important aspects of our work is all these documents will now go online. In fact, they go online at 2 o'clock, so that people will be able to examine the documents and to see what has been redacted and be able to form their own judgments as to what was actually taking place. But I'll ask Professor Scraton to speak about what emerged in the exchange of emails and correspondence.
Well, I can actually take both of those questions together. I mean, the importance of the immediate aftermath is that self-taken statements, as they were referred to, and they've been popularly called recollections, were taken for internal purposes by the South Yorkshire Police. And these handwritten recollections were there primarily to service the South Yorkshire Police's attempt to put together its case. And it was a highly defensive case. That isn't our value judgment. That is clear from the actual process. What we have seen, that when those that they were reviewed and altered, the argument that was put forward was that they would be reviewed and altered to remove conjecture and opinion. But what the correspondence demonstrates is that anything, quote, unhelpful to the force's case were, quote, altered, deleted or qualified. And those officers, and there were a number who objected to this process are reported as being helped with that process. What comes out of this, then, is far from the assumption made in Lord Justice Stuart Smith's scrutiny of evidence, where it was considered that there were only a few statements that were reviewed and altered that would have been of significance. We found that 116 out of 164 were amended to remove or alter comments that were directly unfavourable to the South Yorkshire Police.
Right. Let's go right to the back, because I can see a... Yes.
What we're saying, we will leave people to judge whether they consider it improper, but what we can see very clearly, it wasn't about conjecture. It was directly those comments that were unfavourable to the police. And I can come back in a second and discuss that issue around the Chief Constable comment.
Yeah, Andrew Bounds at the Financial Times. There's some material in the document about Norman Bettison, who's now, of course, Chief Constable of West Yorkshire, and his role in the South Yorkshire Police investigation. Now, I don't want to ask you to make a value judgment, but I found it quite difficult to follow what exactly he was doing, and I wondered if you could somebody in the panel could put that succinctly into what his role was in this South Yorkshire Police case, as it were, to defend themselves.
It appears very clearly that in the aftermath, Norman Bettison was not in attendance at the match, and he was one of a team that was put together under what became the Wayne inquiry, the internal South Yorkshire Police inquiry, and some of that team were involved directly in review and alteration, although Norman Bettison has always denied his involvement. But he retained a very active role throughout the whole process, whether it was at the inquest or afterwards. And going back to a point that was raised by Owen a few minutes ago, when the actual process came about of the Police Federation putting their case forward, Norman Bettison was the person who actually, at one of the Police Federation meetings, showed a film that was clearly concerned with the police position with regard to Hillsborough, and indeed he took that film down to Parliament and showed it again in Parliament. So that process of his involvement is threaded through at a range of levels.
Right. On the aisle there, just in front of... That's it.
Nick Garnett from BBC 5 Live. Who told rank-and-file police officers to concentrate their investigation on alcohol and the amount of alcohol in the victims and those injured in their bodies and in the subsequent hospital treatment they received?
This took place in the gymnasium. Phil, would you like to speak to that?
Yes, I mean, again, we're into a situation where we're talking about what we would call corridor conversations. But a very important element of this process is on the morning that the truth was published in The Sun. That morning, the Police Federation held a meeting in Sheffield, in a restaurant, actually, during the morning. And at that process, the Police Federation Secretary stated that while the Chief Constable could not state it publicly, he had given the Police Federation a free hand and his support. The Chief Constable later attended that meeting, and when he attended that meeting, he stated very clearly that a defence had to be prepared based on, quote, a rock-solid story, and that the blame should be directed towards, quote, drunken, ticketless individuals. He believed at that meeting that the Taylor inquiry would in fact exonerate the South Yorkshire Police. So you can see the generation of this story is happening in that process immediately after. I want to make one more additional point, and it would be this, that over the days that story emerged, basically the Sunday, the Monday and the Tuesday, and of course it was published first in the London Evening Standard on the Tuesday night, 4 senior police officers approached a news agency, White's news agency in Sheffield, with the story, and it was only when they had the 4th account that they felt they had enough, it would be quadrupulation, but triangulation, to actually go with the story. And that is precisely what happened. So you can see it's working at those 2 levels, but it's quite clear from the documents that the Chief Constable made that statement according to the Police Federation minutes of that meeting.
But surely it was happening even earlier than that, because it happened in the gymnasium.
Exactly.
What I'm keen on is to find out how the focus went onto alcohol so quickly.
Let me ask Bill to come in on this.
We know that the decision that blood alcohol levels be taken from all of the deceased at post-mortem was taken by the coroner. The documents show that. We know from the timing that decision must have been taken on the Saturday evening or early on the Sunday morning. We can't pin it down any more closely than that. And the documents show that all of the pathologists were involved in carrying out the coroner's instructions. The documents unfortunately shed no more light on the decision-making around taking alcohol samples from some of the survivors who were taken to hospital.
And all these documents, of course, are now and have been in the public domain for the last 10 minutes, so there's a rich seam there for you to mine. There.
Martin Geisler from ITV News. It's a question for Professor Scraton, I guess. This report backs up what you and the families clearly have been saying for many, many years. Did you discover anything that you didn't expect to find? And if so, to what extent?
I mean, I'm not going to be evasive about this because it's a 400-page report. And I think that a considerable amount of the material that we previously researched and knew about that was published in Hillsborough the Truth is borne out by the research here. But the one thing I would say is that there is a whole range of material, particularly the medical evidence, which is absolutely crucial, that is new. That re-evaluation of that evidence, that reanalysis of that evidence is crucial. I think the material I referred to a second ago about the news agency and the story unfolding, that is all about the depth and integrity of the documentation. What is very, very clear here, which is most unusual in any investigation, is that just the sheer volume and density of the material that is there, the way in which we've been able to cross-reference that in doing the research so that we can build a story, a narrative that is absolutely clear and beyond doubt, and then at that same time provide references online to documents that you can read alongside the report. So the analysis and the depth of the analysis is what I think has really hit home for me, and it actually takes the process to another level. And I think my final point would be, I think that was demonstrated by the Prime Minister's assertion in the House of Commons a few minutes ago. It was so powerful that he is clearly beyond doubt. It is clearly for him beyond doubt that the evidence points in the direction that the families for many years have argued.
Yes, wait for the mic. Thank you.
Brian Reeve from the Daily Mirror. Prior to today, the Hillsborough disaster went down as the biggest disaster, sporting disaster in this country's history. Do you think now it's going to go down as the biggest cover-up in the history of this country?
Excuse me. I think that there are other steps that need to be taken before one can make that sort of judgment. Clearly, the documentary evidence shows that what people understood so far was not the whole story. And when you talk about cover-up, it suggests all sorts of other culpabilities. And I think there are necessary steps to take in order to prove culpability. And I think that's where the panel rightly draws back from making that sort of judgment. But I appreciate the question.
Nick, again.
You've made it very clear that it's beyond your terms of reference to make judgments or recommendations. But you have on your panel a very experienced lawyer, a very senior police officer, and a professor who I think is in the Department of Law. And I would be interested to find out whether they would be at all surprised or shocked if criminal prosecutions were to follow some of the new revelations which have come out of today's panel report, whether that be into mistakes which were made on the day or potentially perverting the course of justice in the aftermath.
Well, then I'm delighted to ask Raju and Paul if they'd like to comment on your question.
I think for the reasons you've already adverted to, it really would be improper for me to offer an opinion on what I think. I think what I can say is that there is sufficient new material, sufficient new evidence that cries out for proper consideration by the proper authorities, whose job it will be to decide whether that evidence amounts to sufficient for purposes of a prosecution.
I would totally agree with that, that it's much time has passed since these things actually happened. There's a lot of new material now in the public domain, and it's for those agencies and those bodies that have to make decisions to now consider that in the light of the time that has passed, in the light of public interest, in the light of all the things they have to consider, but those are their considerations. I would neither be surprised nor not surprised after what we've found out in this review.
Could I add a rider to what you've just heard, which is from a layperson's point of view, observing both inquiries and this particular panel process? It seems to me that one of the problems with legal inquiries is that it distances the victims and their families. What has been so positive about this process is because it's not an inquiry, we've been able to engage closely with the families, so they've not felt that distancing which has taken place on other occasions with legal processes. And there may well be, depending upon what the Attorney General says, further legal steps. But I want to say that the panel process has been good in that it has allowed the panel to work closely with the families.
If I might add also, James, everyone here, as I know from my own work, wants to hear new judgments and new opinions from the panel. What judgments have been made are in the report and are backed, each one of them, by a piece of paper which you can access now online, which is now public property. Don't expect the panel to come here and give you a whole lot of new assessments of the situation. We spent 2.5 years doing that. Peter Marshall again.
Great play has been made over the years about missing CCTV tapes from the control room. Did you get anywhere looking for these missing CCTV tapes?
I'll ask Christine if she'll speak to that, but can I just say that for me, one of the most revealing moments was standing in the police control box and realizing how visible pens 3 and 4 were. There was no need for media technology to see what was happening in those 2 pens. But Christine, in terms of accessing material.
We accessed a great deal of video material, and we did make very stringent inquiries for the CCTV tapes that you mentioned, which apocryphally have been missing for a very, very long time, and we didn't find them. So, but we did do our best to establish that we had, as Phil said, an audit trail of the CCTV that we did have available to us.
But the tapes were missing. I mean, the tapes are missing.
Well, who knows that they're missing, because we never established that they were where they were or that they were truly there in the first place. So it's an apocryphal story about the missing tapes. We never had any evidence that would lead us to believe that they'd been destroyed, but we never found them.
That's a problem, isn't it? You can't know what you haven't got, what you're not given.
Well, you do know what you haven't got to some extent, normally with documentary evidence, because of this forensic piecing together of documents which actually support each other. So you know what you haven't got then. But the situation with the CCTV tapes was slightly different.
I think that if I can just, I think the importance of the question is about the assumed robbery of 2 tapes, you know, and it goes back to various accounts. What I am convinced of is that whatever, if those tapes existed, and let's say that they did, whatever was on them would not have helped us any more than the material that we had. In other words, not only the visual evidence, not only the actual evidence of people from the control box, but all the other tapes and all the other material that was there. There are no gaps. What I'm trying to say is there are no gaps in the sequence of events that would suggest that 2 further tapes or 5 further tapes would have given us any more information than we needed to be able to base our findings in the work, or what this adds to public understanding is the phrase we use. Nothing would have provided us more than what we have. That's what I'm trying to say to you.
Down here at the front.
Tony Barrett, The Times. You mentioned earlier that no one came before the committee, before the panel, and just by extension to the question about the tapes, you produced a thorough report that I think has surprised everyone by how extensive it is. Do you think, having been through all the evidence, but with the remit having been only for the documents themselves, how great do you think the scope is for the scrutiny to become wider?
Roger, do you want to comment on that?
I'm not sure I understood that question.
What I mean is that the investigation, as it stands, is reduced only to the documents, but there would be other anecdotal evidence and other information that you wouldn't have. Is there now scope for the investigation to be spread even wider?
There is material there that is crying out for scrutiny. We've already heard that the Attorney General has gone on the record saying he will be giving consideration to the material to decide precisely what kind of scrutiny it will deserve. I have no doubt that the Home Secretary will also be looking at her obligations. And there are many ways to achieve accountability for the purposes of justice. Investigations can be through many modes, and it'll be for all these various government authorities to decide how best.
But without underplaying the work that you've done as a panel, do you feel that this is only part of the story?
Well, can I say that the panel process comes to an end at the end of September. We're staying in place so that we can support the families in accessing and assimilating the material. The website, however, will continue to be serviced so that there will be an editor that can add any new material that is forthcoming. As to scrutiny of that material, then that will depend on subsequent legal processes, the next one being the Attorney General. And beyond that, we can't comment any further.
I will come back to people who've asked questions before, but who hasn't asked one yet? There's a gentleman there.
Thank you. Martin Beckford from the Daily Telegraph. One of the things that your report has found for the first time is the fact that the ambulance service also doctored statements. And I'm just wondering whether that was, I know you don't want to say conspiracy, whether that was linked to what police were trying to do to build up their own defence or some other reason.
Yeah. The actual explanation that's given, and you'll see this in the report, in their own documentation from the South Yorkshire Metropolitan Ambulance Service, was that there's a wide variation in amendments, and that is in the same kind of justification that's given by the South Yorkshire Police to remove conjecture and so on. But what we have found is that in a number of cases, criticism of the ambulance service, their response was deflected, and clearly the efficiency of their response was emphasised. So what you see there is self-explanatory. It is about it is about putting the service, I would think, into the best light.
Who's not asked a question yet and wants to get in? This gentleman there in the raincoat.
John Sutton, Liverpool Echo. Should members of the families require the panel's assistance beyond September, will members of the panel continue to help them in their journey towards justice?
They would have to do that on an informal rather than a formal basis.
Right, back to The Guardian, yes?
Owen Gibbs from The Guardian again. I mean, you've illustrated quite powerfully through the report and through your earlier work how some of these myths took hold among the wider public. Do you hope and expect that today's statement in the Commons and the report you've published will finally lay those to rest?
I certainly think there are two audiences for today. I said this to the families when I was introducing the report this morning. There is the audience of the bereaved and those who share their loss, and then there is the audience of the wider world. And certainly the Prime Minister seemed to recognise this in his statement and in the exchanges. And I think that the way the report is received will add momentum to its seriousness and indeed influence how the wider world views Hillsborough.
Judith, do you want to come back?
The families say that for 23 years they've never had the truth. Do you now feel that that's changed for them and this is the truth?
You will have to ask the families that. It's not a tried response to your question. What I can tell you is that in the process of the panel's work, on more than one occasion, the families have said to me that this is the first time that they feel they've ever been taken seriously and that anybody has ever really listened to them. And I think whatever may be the deficiencies of the panel's work in terms of making value judgments, its success is that it has taken the families and their questions very seriously.
I think there's a very important point that goes to the heart of what you're asking, Judith, and the question that was asked earlier. I think that in terms of value judgments, that is not our role. But when you have the opportunity to read the report in depth, and there's no precedent for this, what you will see is that value judgments are not necessary. The actual documents speak for themselves. The depth of the documents, the integrity of the research into them speak for themselves. So we don't need to draw on value judgments to draw conclusions. The conclusions are there. And to go back to the earlier point, which I think is really important about where does this fit within the kind of overall notion of truth around Hillsborough. I don't think that the panel's work at all was inhibited. In fact, I think it was strengthened by not having a public inquiry status and not bringing people before it, and not 23 years later trying to piece together conjecture and reality and so on. What we have here, 23 years of contemporaneous documents, stage by stage, which has gone through a forensic analysis at all levels. And I think that in that sense, it's a much stronger document than anything I've ever seen in this area of investigative research.
David Conn, again.
Yeah, David Conn, The Guardian. That leads into what I was going to ask you, actually, which was, this has been, as far as I understand it, a unique exercise where there's been this level of disclosure of documents, and there's been an independent panel of experts to be able to go into them and report on them in this way. I mean, there was nervousness here in Liverpool and amongst the families about what you were going to find and how definitive it was going to be. And then I think with the Prime Minister's statement that it is as incontrovertible as it could have been. I know that you're bound by the terms of reference, you're not making value judgments, but I suppose to Professor Scraton and to the Bishop and to anybody else, how do you assess the impact of what you've done? I know in your public statements, the Bishop, you've said you see your role in this, which is very unusual for somebody from the church to be involved with something like this, as far as I understand it. You see it as part of your wider pastoral role to the people of Liverpool, so perhaps you might reflect a little bit on what you see, how you see the job that you've done today and the response it's already had.
Thank you, David. I think one of the special characteristics of our work is that, in a moment, the families themselves are going to be able to interrogate every single member of the panel. We're going upstairs for a question and answer session. And we have constructed this day very thoughtfully so that the dignity of the families would be protected, so that they would be able to assimilate what we knew was going to be difficult material, and that they would not be shortchanged in any way, so that they wouldn't be exposed to the world without the opportunity of really understanding the material that we were laying before them. Which is why, in fact, this press conference will need to come to a close soon so that we can go upstairs and continue the engagement with the families. And you're absolutely right, David, to point out that on this panel, we all bring different expertise. I suppose the expertise I bring is as a pastor and somebody who is committed to a just and fair world. And it seems to me that that lies at the heart of the work that we're doing in the panel, that we are looking for truth and for justice.
Let's take just two more questions.
I'm sorry I keep adding. I think there are 2 points that spring to mind for me in that. I mean, the one thing that is striking is that we are a panel of very different expertise, but we're also different people. And the issue for me that has been so important in the panel's work is the unanimity of the panel, that there is no dissenting voice. And I think the fact that we can all stand over every word that is in this report is something that is important. To go back to the families, and many of the people in the room would know that I've had a long association with many of the families. And when I finished this morning giving the address on the report alongside my colleague, Dr. Kirkup, to see every member of the families standing and applauding the work, to me, was a clear indication that we'd done the right thing. And that, alongside the unequivocal apology and acknowledgement that has been given by the Prime Minister and all others in the House of Commons on behalf of our society, is absolutely crucial to us as a panel.
I think we'd all endorse 100% what Phil has just said. I'm only going to take two more questions. Right at the back, there's a blue shirt who's asked one already. Have you asked one already? Well, I'll come to you next then, and then that must be it.
Dan Freeman from LBC again. Just on a personal level for the eight of you, I just wondered how difficult has it been for you to uncover some of the truths that you've discovered with this report?
I'm going to do a free-for-all here and let somebody choose that question if they want. Please, Paul.
I think there are difficulties. There are always difficulties in looking at things that have gone wrong or things that have been done wrong. And that should in no way take away from the fact that many police officers, many ambulance staff, Many lawyers tried to do their best at the occasion of Hillsborough, but some got it badly wrong. And that does make it difficult. It makes it difficult in a personal sense. But what makes it really strong then is to think that we're giving a document that can actually help make it better for the future, because these mistakes don't need to happen again. And one of the things that struck me very, very strongly was the lack of acknowledgement of the lessons of the previous years at Hillsborough, the lack of change that had happened at the ground in the years coming up to 1989 that was really known about. There were lots of safety features that could have been improved. That was known about. Nothing had happened. I think that was quite strong for me, and I'm quite glad to have been a member. I'm really glad to have been a member of the panel, but I'm quite glad that this document is now out there, and the supporting documentation for every single fact is there and accessible to the public.
And I'm sorry, I must take just the last one here on the aisle.
Dan Kay, Liverpool Echo. How confident are you that you have received absolutely everything that's there, and that nothing has been held back?
I'll get Christine, please, to answer that, because she oversaw a lot of the accessing material.
The report and the appendix to the report in particular deals with the process that we use to ensure that we undertook this forensic approach to accessing information, and we actually moved from one organisation to another because we realised that organisations that we hadn't originally had in our sites actually might have had some information because of this forensic approach. As far as I'm concerned, we had absolutely all the information made available to us, some of it many times. There's a huge amount of duplication that we have attempted to weed out and which you'll be able to identify in the master catalogue. And you have to make a decision for yourselves. In the master catalogue, which will be online this afternoon, you'll be able to see all the documents that we considered, whether they were relevant or not, and what we did with them. So the whole audit trail is there for you to make a judgment. I'm absolutely satisfied that we saw absolutely everything that would lead us to being able to draw out from the information the really most important points of adding to public understanding about what happened. And if I can just add one point there, which probably goes back to the last question. The questioner asked what it was like for us. For us, and I know I only speak for myself, but I think I also speak for the panel when I say that, firstly, I consider it to be a privilege to be asked to do this work. But the privilege came from accessing all of the information and finding the truth wherever it led. And that was a prerequisite, I think, for all of us. That the documents told us and will tell you what happened. And there was an understanding on the part of the panel that this was the way that it absolutely had to be.
Phil?
I mean, as a researcher who understands Hillsborough and the history of Hillsborough, my own inclination is very, very clear that there is nothing there that I would have wanted to see or have assumed that we haven't seen. That's why the process has taken so long, the process of access. And it goes back to cross-referencing. If you cross-reference your sources, and many of the people in this room know exactly what I'm talking about, if you cross-reference your sources, then the gaps appear. And then you fill the gaps, and then you look for further work or further material. And in terms of the substance of this report, the 12 chapters and all that we've dealt with, and the questions that the families found that were unanswered, I think we have been able to access all documents that were relevant to those questions and to our own questions. So I'm confident that even if some documents are not there, even if some tapes are not there, whatever, we have sufficient to draw the in-depth conclusions, the analytical conclusions that we have.
James.
In conclusion, I'd just like to thank you very much for respecting what the panel insisted upon, which is that the families should receive this information first. I know there have been various requests from the media to have access on an embargoed basis. I know it's been unusual and difficult not to have that in order to file your stories. But I do, all of us on the panel, appreciate your cooperation in this. And you'll understand now that our priority is to go back and be with the families and allow them the same opportunity to interrogate the panel that you yourselves have had. Thank you very much indeed.
We did watch the panel's session, and obviously we intend to be a lot more forthright than they were allowed to be. So, first of all, if I may start with the ladies. Far end is Sue Roberts. Sue's our office manager and secretary of the Hillsborough Family Support Group. Next is Jenny Hicks, my ex-wife and also vice chairman of the Hillsborough Family Support Group. Margaret is our chairman. I'm the president, and I don't know whether you know these two gentlemen on my left. Peter Mansfield, QC.
Michael, but don't worry.
Sorry, I beg your pardon.
There is a Peter Mansfield.
No, there is, yeah. I beg your pardon, Michael. It's the stress of the day. Michael Mansfield, QC, and obviously, may I call you Charlie Faulkner?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, with no more ado then, I'll ask Margaret to speak first.
If I may, I'd just like to start this press conference off to thank the panel, the independent panel, for all its hard work that it's done on behalf of everybody concerned, not just the victims, but also the survivors and the city of Merseyside. I know they took a lot of stick during the process of their remit, and it made it more difficult for them to get on with the job they had to do. But people kept asking me, did we have trust in the independent panel? Yes, we did. We said it all along, we had the trust, and they've proven to us why we had the trust with them. So I would like to thank Bishop James, who's been a brilliant chair, and all of the independent panel. So I'd like to say that on record, on our behalf. Thank you so much for what they've done today, because they've actually accelerated all our fans. They've made our city proud today, but most importantly, they've made them 96 rest in peace for the first time in all them years. So thank you very much. Okay, Trevor, you'd like to take over?
All right. I think what I'll just try to do, I mean, obviously, it is a big, thick tome. We're all going to spend an awful lot of time analysing it. And as you know, there are 450,000 documents for us to start and go on. We intend, towards the end, to let you ask legal questions of our representatives, but I'd like to summarise where we feel we are. We feel totally vindicated. You know, we have had all sorts of accusations thrown at us over the 23 years. We've been accused of being vengeful, spiteful, looking for a scapegoat, looking for compensation, all of which is a total load of rubbish. And if today says one thing to the world, we are vindicated in our search for the truth. As Margaret has already touched on, we feel for the first time in an awful long time that, you know, we are on the brink of a breakthrough. I think the breakthrough's been made, if I'm honest. We need to go through this, but we've been through a more in-depth presentation from the panel than yourselves have, and that ended up in a spontaneous standing ovation for the panel. And as you know, we don't brown-nose people, we say it as we feel it. So I think that says what the majority of the families feel. I think I've said myself on many, many occasions that there were two disasters at Hillsborough, the one on the day and the one afterwards. And I think if this report does anything, it shows that the second, or the aftermath, was not only just a disaster, it was a contrived, manipulated and vengeful and spiteful attempt to divert the blame. We've said many times that we've had to take on the authority. I think one of the things that we're a bit surprised about today is the unreserved apology that we've had from David Cameron. We were hoping for it. We were hoping for a report that's come out as it has done. But I think almost across the board, everything we've said over the 23 years, the inquests, the 315 cut-off in particular, and we will come back to that because that's extremely important. The Dirty Tricks campaign, even our friend Norman Bettison has been found out. And, we have yet to see the documents just as you have, but we don't think there'll be anywhere for them to go. With the help of our gentleman on our left, and we'll come back to that again in a minute, the truth's out today and the justice starts tomorrow. We intend to follow every avenue, and that is everything from prosecution through to changing for unlawful killing verdicts and every other avenue that we feel totally vindicated now this report has put the truth in the domain. We are not looking for scapegoats. We are looking for, accountability, and those should hang themselves in shame. Now, one slip-up I did make, if there's anybody from the Sun, we intended to ask you to leave. So is there anybody from the Sun?
Would they be truthful?
Well, good point, Michael. Okay, we'll assume there isn't. So I think, without more ado, it's probably as easy that we try and answer your questions. As I say, almost across the board, we feel that, it's a slam dunk, if I can use that modern jargon, that, everything we've said. Now, you'll have to forgive us, we don't know who you are, but we'll try and be as fair as possible. Shall I?
Trevor, did you mean hang their heads in shame, not hang themselves?
Oh, sorry. Well, it was a Freudian, it was probably a Freudian slip. I meant hang their heads in shame, yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, this gentleman was first,
Just
yeah.
to clarify that.
Nick Ravenscroft, BBC News. From the skim reading that you and your legal advisors have been able to make today, you talk about possible prosecutions. Are you advised that this is a likelihood?
Well, I'll directly answer it in the sense that I don't think either of us are prepared to reveal any advice that we may have already given or will give. So the answers are framed in a different way. Namely, it's perfectly obvious from what has already been said in the House of Commons and what is in the report that criminal liability, for which there is no time limit, criminal liability is very much on the cards. And the point I'd like to make is that it's the families who forced this agenda that have forced the pace, and they've done it without resources they've had to raise themselves all the way through the 23 years. So the point now is that if Cameron means what he says on that, no reason to doubt this, that justice has to follow truth, then they have a responsibility to ensure, and I think they're making that commitment today, that, for example, the Director of Public Prosecutions should look very carefully, as should the Attorney General, at the material that has been trawled over in the 450,000 documents to, in other words, to assess not just the question of unlawful killing, but also the cover-up and the perversion of the course of justice, which is a quite separate matter, but is obviously connected. And so, therefore, yes, they're very clearly there to be examined.
Yeah.
What is your overriding feeling today?
Absolutely. I can't explain it really. It's a bit of both. You've got emotions, you've got, but you're absolutely delighted for the fans who were there that day. My big thing is I wanted to make sure that they were completely exonerated, not just the 96 who died, but I wanted to make, and that has happened. I think the journey now for them fans is, that's it. It's done. They've done nothing wrong that day. I've been saying that for a long time. They saved a lot of lives, as well as what they've done with the people who died. But indirectly, we don't know how many lives they saved by what they done that day, because the police failed in their duty. They did not use their common sense to do what they should have done that day. Our fans done that. So I think the journey's over for the fans now. They can go away and they've got nothing to feel guilty about, but be proud of themselves. Our journey now, we're still going to go, obviously, on another journey. So ours is not quite over. We've still got more to do. And I know they will be there to support us on that journey. And I can't thank all of them enough. And our way to thank them was fighting on their behalf. And I think we've achieved what we set out to do on that today.
Owen Gibson from The Guardian. Obviously, you suspected for many years some of the elements of this cover-up and some of the you know the lengths to which the police and others went to smear those that were killed on that day. But were you surprised at just how far it went and the the speed with which they sort of put that plan into action, if you like?
Yeah. If I can answer that in two ways, really, and then I'll need to come back to the journey question, if I might. Yes, we are surprised. Not totally, because that's what we've been saying all this time. I think a couple of things that came out from, as I said, we got a bit more of an in-depth briefing than you got. When you get the Chief Constable sitting down with his trade union to cobble together a solid story, you know, I think they used the term in their defence, but what they mean is to slide the blame onto everybody else, then, you know, we've reached a new depth of depravity, basically. I'm staggered. I mean, we've known the 3:15 cut-off was unjust. But I mean, what we do know now today, that possibly as many as 41 people might have survived. You know, the panel have to be more guarded, as I said in our introduction, than we are. We will look at those. That's why I wanted to return to the journey question. There will be a legal journey, but there's also an emotional journey for lots of our families again, Jenny and myself included. So, you know, and that won't be in the public domain. There's obviously a lot of confidential medical information will have to be gone through. But I think the other thing that shocked us a little as well is when we hear that there's evidence that Popper and other people, again, all tried. I think I've said to some of you over the years, we felt that the inquest was trying to rewrite Taylor. Well, there's now evidence that shows that's absolutely true. There's minutes of meetings, you know. You know, picking up the point, to try and sum up today is extremely difficult. You know, we should feel triumphant, if you like. We feel vindicated, sorry. But there's also, you know, it's terribly, terribly difficult. You may or may not be aware we had 3 people faint as the information was given to us. That's how important it is to these families. And, you know, and that makes it even more spiteful and below the belt, some of the dirty tricks that's gone on. Yes, David.
Yeah, David Conn from The Guardian. I know that there was some nervousness for a long time, right through the process, about will the panel produce something like this. So both this morning when you had your briefing and also particularly when the Prime Minister of the country stood up and was that unequivocal and issued an apology, how did you and other families feel after all these years when you sat and watched that?
If I may, I can honestly say I was absolutely delighted to hear that, to be honest with you, David, for a few reasons. I think what the families have been put through for 23 years is absolutely a disgrace. It's a disgrace to the system itself. When you think that they knew this 23 years ago, a lot of people knew this 23 years, and to put the families through that much pain, heartache, mudslinging, because every avenue we went down, and we don't forget at the time, I must say this also, we had to pay for it ourselves. They were getting everything they went down, they got their legal costs paid out the taxpayers' money, and yet they were the liars and we were the truthful ones and we were the innocent, and it's been proven today. And to me, to hear that apology, yes, it goes a long way. It doesn't make us feel better, because we are still, and always will be, at the end of this, the losers at Hillsborough. We will always be the losers. So, but in that sense, I feel my son and 95 others now, they know. I said it in one of my speeches. And it's not a very good saying, I suppose, but we were the eyes, we were the ears, but by God, we were the voices. And we used our voices to get to this stage. And I'm so proud of all our families for that, because without them and the support we've had, we wouldn't have got this today. So well done to all of them as well.
Hi, it's Andrew Bounce from the Financial Times. I think, Derek, you said that the families have been right all along. A lot of this information isn't particularly new. I mean, Lord Falconer, you've been held high office in government. Why has it taken 23 years for this to come out? Calls for inquests, calls for investigations, calls for inquiries, and it was only 2009 that those calls were heard, and now we've got to this stage. Is the system any better today than it was, 15, 20, 25 years ago? And does this independent inquiry method offer maybe a way of doing things in the future that's better than the public inquiries and the tribunals?
Well, it might do. I mean, I think you asked the question, why has it taken so long to come out? The reason it's taken so long to come out is because practically every single one of the public bodies involved withheld information and told lies. And secondly and separately, the justice system at every stage failed the families. It failed them in relation to the public inquiries that went on. It failed them in relation to the inquest, and detail is given, chapter and verse is given in the report. It failed them both in the consideration of whether there should be criminal prosecutions and the criminal prosecutions, and it failed them in the civil proceedings as well. And the questions this raises is both about the justice system, which should be able to deal with this, and it wasn't, and also the extent to which it was possible for public bodies to withhold information.
The report seems to say that it stopped basically at Chief Constable level. Are you convinced of that, or is there still nagging doubts that it went higher than that?
I'm not sure the report does say that, Brian. There was a comment made that it went as far as Bernard Ingham. Now, you could say that Bernard Ingham controlled Margaret Thatcher or the other way around. I'm not quite sure. What we have said in the past, and again for those who won't remember, at the time there was the big pressure for football fans to carry an identity card. If you played golf or went to rugby, you weren't necessary, but if you went to football, you had to have an ID card. I think there is a comment that, part of the mindset of the police on the day of controlling violence rather than looking at crowd safety, does go back to some of the difficulties in the past. We can't get away from that. But I think the difficulty here is that there was a climate, and I have to believe, I was a big Maggie Thatcher fan until Hillsborough. We don't think there's anything in the minutes, but there again, there probably wouldn't with cabinet minutes. They just have letterheads rather than, a verbatim report. But I would think that there was a sweeping line of the handbag, the police mustn't be blamed, it will destroy law and order for all time. And we don't know whether we'll ever get to the bottom of that. And again, I'll let the others answer that. My opinion is that it did go to the top, even if she wasn't involved in the detailed planning.
Yeah. Yes, definitely went to the top. Don't care what anyone says. If they want to sue me, they can do. I think it was from the top to right to the bottom, from the very top to the bottom. And no one will ever change my mind on that at all. I do believe that. I'll always believe that, no matter what minutes they haven't found. You don't need minutes to say things behind closed doors. No, and it went on behind closed doors, and it was said.
One thing I would like to send a message to Bernard Ingham, and that is just listen to what's been said today and then see if you want to repeat what he's gone on and said so many evil times. Yes, sir.
Dan Freeman from LBC. Your message today to the people who firstly concocted those lies and then continued to peddle them for the last 23 years?
At the very least, resign, then stand up and apologise, and help us to get the message to the rest of the world that, what has been shown to be the case, and that is that, there was a dirty tricks campaign that went on to deflect the blame. I got into trouble with the Dunblane families on a radio programme when I said that the superintendent who issued the firearms certificates was to be applauded. Now, it wasn't for issuing the firearm certificate, it was for the fact that he resigned immediately. You know, the guy made a monumental mistake, but he stood up and be counted. I've said on many occasions, had Peter Wright resigned and not put his resignation in the knowledge it was going to be rejected, then that would have been to his credit, and it wasn't. That's not what happened. You know, we believe, as Brian touched on, that the conspiracy to deflect the blame started on the Sunday morning, if not before then.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just take the chap behind you. Yeah.
Chris Bradley from Mercury Press. How did the incompetence of the ambulance service when fans were lying on the pitch strike you?
Well, I think that's one of the lessons we have learned today. Obviously, we knew nothing. We suspected, but there's now evidence, and pretty strong evidence, that had the response been better and quicker, then certainly some people would have survived. It's possibly impossible to put a number on it. We are staggered, basically, at the level of incompetence. In fairness, that was one of the comments I was going to make, that Bill Kirkup, in his presentation on the medical stuff to us, said that almost at every level, the command and the leadership had fallen down. And, you know, we don't blame the guys on the floor, you know, on the shop floor, if you pardon the expression, the common Bobby. The problems with the command structure, the foreseeability. Yeah.
No, I do.
Yeah, well, okay. Well, we don't all agree on everything, as you'll see, but you know, we do have a problem with it, and the difficulty is there's almost an across-the-board problem for us now that almost everything's gone wrong. Yeah, take David first, and then you. Yeah.
Obviously, you've had an apology now from the Prime Minister, and there has been an apology from Sheffield Wednesday before the report came. Have you had any apologies before this from any of the bodies in the report? And what is your view on how Sheffield Wednesday, the football club, has dealt with the families over the years?
Latterly, I'll deal with the Sheffield Wednesday first. We have had I think if I could quote David Cameron, it isn't just getting an apology, it's the spirit in which it is made. Yeah. And we've said many times we're sick of tea and sympathy. We've had lots of tea and sympathy. And we have had some half-hearted apologies that weren't really meant. So no, we haven't had an apology in reality. So there's that chap there next. Yeah.
Can I just say, I've just been told by someone that in the last few minutes, Kelvin Mackenzie has apologised and apparently said it's taken 23 years for me to realise that I should have written the lies and not the truth in that notorious Sun front page headline. So what would be your reaction to Kelvin Mackenzie's apology today?
Too little, too late is the immediate response, and we will be pressurising the BBC if they want us to do anything else with them ever again. He's off the screens, or we won't have out to do with him. The man is low life, basically.
Yeah.
Clever low life, but low life.
Hello, James Cooper from Sky. You spent such a large chunk of your life trying to find and seek the truth. You've got that today. Michael Mansfield talked about this being the beginning of the end. You talked about seeking justice from tomorrow. How long might that process take, bearing in mind how long it's taken you to get to this stage?
As long as it takes.
Well, I think just to come in, I mean, the two stages. The first is the government, through its agencies, namely the Attorney General for the inquests and the Director of Public Prosecutions in relation to the other proceedings, criminal and, for that matter, having a look at civil proceedings that have happened and have been obviously flawed because of the material itself on which they're based being flawed. So all of it's got to be looked at. And so that comes first. But they must understand that if they don't do their job, we will. Now, time is what you're asking about. The Attorney General said today, or rather on his behalf it was said, he's going to get on with that immediately, looking at the inquest. There can be no impediment to that. And in fact, it's overwhelming in terms of the material that's available. I would expect him to be in a position to announce a decision within 4 to 6 weeks. It doesn't take longer than that, given the report is in summary form. As far as other proceedings, the Director of Public Prosecution's looking at the documentation, because a criminal prosecution is a very different matter and it has to reach a certain standard of proof. That'll take longer. It may take 6 months. It may take 9 months. I think the families, after all 23 years, are prepared to wait that time.
The other point is that once the proceedings start, and there are bound to be lots of proceedings now, they will be dealt with much quicker if the public bodies involved acknowledge the wrongs they have committed. If they go on fighting, and if they go on denying and lying about their responsibility, then they will take time. If, on the other hand, they acknowledge what this report and the underlying documents show, then the proceedings will be much, much quicker.
Hi, David Bartlett, the Liverpool Echo. Could the panel comment on Norman Bettison? His role is laid out in the report. Do you think he should resign from West Yorkshire Police? And what do you think of the way he played things down while he was serving in Merseyside?
My lawyer has advised me to be careful what I say. However, I intend to disregard him. I have a company based in Keighley, which is in West Yorkshire, and unfortunately my chief constable bears the same name. Unfortunately, Norman Bettison is my current chief constable. If he has anything about him, he will, I think the term is, look to his position. We said before he was appointed on Merseyside, and some councillors had the balls to actually resign over it, but how he ever got the job on Merseyside, in view of what we now know, beggars belief. If he's anything of a man, he'll stand down and go and scurry up a drain pipe somewhere.
Trevor, I agree. Well said.
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Tony Barrett, The Times. I apologise in advance for asking this, but over the last 23 years there's been so much focus on the people who did wrong at Hillsborough, not enough focus on the victims and on the families and what you've been through. Can you tell us exactly what you felt today when you learned that so many of the 96 could have actually survived given the proper care?
I find it very difficult because, as Trevor said before, what the families heard when that came out today, when they heard it, some of them, obviously passed out. It's a very painful thing to hear because, after what we've gone through for 23 years, and to find out, and of course, us sitting here now, we're talking to you, but I haven't really thought about it because if we do, it's just, your emotions just take over. But we've said to each other when we were coming down here, actually, God, it's James, could have been one of them, could Sarah or Vicky. We don't know which one it is yet. We've got to face that, who they are. So I think it's at the moment it's very difficult for us. So what we're just concentrating on now is the good thing we've had today, to be honest with you, to go back to the vigil at 6 o'clock and hopefully be with all the people in Merseyside, and afterwards think about that side and see our lawyers about that, and obviously, the pathologist, and go through all that. And I think that's the time to deal with that, Tony. Yeah. It's another day and just try and keep today for this.
Again, just to add to that, we sit before you as officers of our group, if you like, but when we go home, in our case, we bereaved parents. In Sue's case, she lost her brother. So, we are the families of the bereaved, and, one of the good things that will come out of today, we can get on with our grieving a bit better.
Yeah.
Yes.
Don't think about it, do you?
Martin Beckford from the Daily Telegraph. Could I just ask the lawyers, what specifically the charges you think all the criminal prosecutions could be, apart from, perverting the course of justice? Is there sort of defamation things? I'm just wondering if there's any specific offences that you think should be looked at.
Yeah, there's an obvious one which the inquest obviously would also need to look at if the Attorney General authorises that. But even if he doesn't, we'll certainly go to court over that issue. Unlawful killing in the sense of gross negligence, because an aspect that hasn't been discussed this afternoon but was discussed in the House of Commons and is in the report And it's not new. It's not just Hillsborough where this has happened. If you look right at the beginning of the summary, you will see that this was forecast from 1981 onwards. They knew that this was a risk, starting with the Spurs match and ending with the match the year before, the same semi-final. There was no safety certificate. They breached the safety rules. That is the beginning of serious negligence, and there's a causation relationship here which the Director of Public Prosecutions would have to look at. So it seems to me that is the biggest and most obvious thing, compounded by what happened on the day. So there's more than the police here. It's not just the police. Sheffield Wednesday need to answer some questions, and the Sheffield authorities need to answer some questions on that score. So that's the big one. Sorry?
Corporate manslaughter.
Well, yes, of course, the rules on corporate manslaughter have changed over the last decade. So there is now a greater facility in terms of the evidential proof required. And of course, there are problems with retrospectivity in relation to that. But in a sense, we don't need corporate responsibility because the plain evidence of the mind, which has always been the problem in bringing prosecutions against companies and so on, what is now in these documents is the kind of information we don't normally get. And if I just go back to your earlier question on Financial Times, I think the process that has gone on here is extremely educative and illustrative of what can happen when you get a body committed to unraveling the truth and getting all the documentation. It's very rare for this to happen. So I think it's an excellent example for the future.
Hi, if I can ask all the family, what do you think the people of Liverpool will get from today, and also in particular Liverpool Football Club?
Well, I think they'll feel equally, relieved at the very least. I don't think there'll be any great rejoicing. I think the time's gone on too long. But, we use that word again, vindicated. All the slurs, you almost would have to spend 23 years apologising to make up for the damage. So, it's not going to be put right overnight, but it should be, I can't use the term a day for rejoicing because it's not a day for it. As we said, we're still losers at the end of the day, but at least the truth is out now and nobody, can say that. It can't be said now because there's evidence to show that it absolutely is not the case. Yeah.
Well, that's a very cynical way of approaching justice. If we based a system on the fact that because we've got sanctions for perversion of the course of justice, people won't reveal what they've been doing, well, of course they won't. And when you're dealing with criminal acts, often criminal minds are very devious. So the real question is, we're not having our cake and eating it, we're wanting a cake in the first place. And if these people, and there are a number of them, had spoken the truth in the first place, and they've got to be encouraged to do that, pour encourager les autres. A process like the one we've just had, if they believe in the future, oh my goodness, another bishop, another place, another time, we can't afford to be caught out. They've been caught out very badly. This is probably the worst of its kind. There have been lots of other ones, on all fronts, across the board. So it seems to me, I think everybody's entitled to say, we need a process like this, because the system, in which, of course, everybody wasn't afraid, failed dismally at every twist and turn. So that's why I put faith in a new process.
Yeah, we've never had a case.
I asked this question earlier of the panel and they couldn't really answer it, but as a prior to today, Hillsborough was the biggest disaster in British sporting history. I'd like to ask the two legal men here, have we just seen the biggest cover-up in British history?
There's a short answer to that, yes.
Andy Hunter, The Guardian. Can I ask from the family perspective and also from a government perspective, did the extent of the Prime Minister's apology take you back today, take you back, surprise you?
Take you back to what?
Were we surprised?
Surprised
If you like,
you, sorry.
I'll answer
Surprised.
that first. And then, yes, we were. I mean, we hoped to get an apology. What we got was an unequivocal, unconditional, unreserved apology, which I have to say I was staggered at. I hold, I have to be careful what I say, I hold politicians in pretty low regard in the main. I didn't used to. I've said many times, I used to be an establishment. I used to actually believe them. I've learned now that that has to be taken with a pinch of salt. No, I have to say, I'm not Cameron's biggest fan, but I thought he was absolutely magnificent today. He basically pulled out all the stops and he started a reconciliation programme that can be only good for society, basically.
I agree with Trevor.
To a degree.
That Cameron did well today. I think, in truth, nothing short of an unequivocal apology was essentially possible. He did the right thing in recognising that. But what a quick read of the report shows is a concerted conspiracy to withhold the truth by public bodies. And it's right that the leader of the public service, the public system, should apologise unequivocally for that. The key thing about what's happened is that the state has been forced to make full disclosure because it hasn't been the state that has been in charge of the disclosure process. It has been a genuinely independent panel with people like the Bishop, Phil Scraton, who have no interest in protecting the state. And it's that process, which has been so unusual, but has led to this absolutely extraordinary day when this huge searchlight has revealed what has happened over the last 23 years. And if it hadn't been an independent panel, you would never have seen so much information. Good for Cameron in acknowledging what happened with his unequivocal apology, but what option was there?
Yeah.
If I can make a comment again on that very point, one of the things that impressed us in the presentation as well is that we've been accused of wanting an inquiry, wanting this, wanting that, but the panel have shown that all of those processes were not done with due diligence, they were not done with vigour, and really, as we've said, it was a bloody whitewash job. Yeah. Even Stuart Smith, who to some extent reinforced what Taylor said in the first place, that it was the primary cause was the loss of police control. We know now from the medical evidence that the panel have uncovered only did half a job. He basically breezed through it, and so, you know, again, we feel totally vindicated in looking for the panel, if you like, because the so-called inquiry wasn't really one.
Question for Lord Falconer. Just, if you go back to you part of the Labour administration, do you have any sense of disappointment that that government didn't do more? Obviously, Jack Straw rejected certain approaches. Do you have a disappointment that not more was done at that time?
Yes. And, I mean, every government has failed, completely, including the government of which I was a part. We should have listened, and we didn't. Because one of the extraordinary things, you've been asking all the time, is what's come out new? It's hugely new in terms of the detail, but from the time that I've met the Hillsborough Family Support Group, it is precisely what they have been saying happened. So they didn't know because they didn't have the information, but now we've got it. All that was being said about what happened on the day and all that happened about the cover-up that followed, they've been vindicated. So I completely regret it in every single respect.
On this question of what's new, I think the people over there know that most of what you heard today, you knew already. I'd like to ask you, what percentage of what you saw today was actually totally new and a shock to you?
I can answer that. I can answer that. What was new and a shock to us was how many of them could have been saved.
Yes.
That is the most important thing. And I don't want to dwell on that now because that does make me sad because, as I said before, I'll go home and think about that. Was James one of them?
What I mean, Margaret, is I've, 450,000 documents,
Yeah.
God knows how many pages. I've been with you over the years. You've told me things that I saw today, and people now are going, oh, gulp,
Yes.
You knew this stuff. No one was listening. No one was listening in the establishment. No one was listening in politics. And not many people listening in the media. And I just wonder, Trevor, percentage-wise, what of that report is new?
Well, it's higher than you might think, to be fair, Brian. I mean, you used the term blown away. We've been blown away by how bad it was. We've suspected it. I was there on the day. I couldn't believe that people were saying totally different things to what I'd seen. I even doubted myself on occasions. But I think the thing that hit me today, apart from the fact that so many people could possibly have been saved, and that, what went on with the police also went on with the ambulance service and all the rest.
46 things.
Yeah, it beggars belief, if you pardon the expression. We knew it was bad, but we didn't think it was this bad, if I can. So to try and put a percentage on it, it's probably as high as 40 or 50%. Because, again, we had no idea that the ambulance, we've praised the ambulance service on other occasions, but one good thing that Kirkup said, which, again, I don't know whether he said it to you, but it isn't just about getting ambulances or vehicles, if you like, to the scene of the disaster. It's what you do with the resources when you get there. And one of the things that hit me particularly hard was that the triage was not put in place even as late as 30, 40 minutes after the game was stopped. Now, we all know there's about the 6 minutes, I think, is what they talk about, the golden 6 minutes, I think it's called. Well, they'd long passed before we had any sense of organisation. So, to find out that possibly, and again, we can't put an exact number on it, but if we quote Kirkup, that, up to 41 people could possibly have been saved is mind-blowing. We thought maybe a few, but, 20 plus, if you like, is a very good estimate, probably. Yeah, it's almost 50% could have possibly been saved. In fairness to the ambulance service, and again, I don't know whether Kirkup made this clear to you, is that the primary cause of their slow response was the fact that the police didn't initiate the disaster plan properly. He says in the thing, and I made a note of it, is that, failed management between South Yorkshire Police, the ambulance service, the FA, all of that contributed to it. But again, I was staggered when he started giving us some facts and figures of the actual times, which are all in the body of the report, but, it's going to take us a few weeks to get through all of this lot. But, it was absolutely staggering. That's why we found it a very difficult morning.
Trevor, what, if you can sum up what personal toll this has put on your lives for the last 23 years, and what on earth could ever make up for that?
I'll answer the second bit first because that's the easiest. Nothing can make up for it. At the end of the day, as Margaret said, I'm still a father who's lost his 2 daughters, and I always will be. I think the thing that's come out today is I've been called lots of things, as I said, spiteful, vindictive, and I do feel that, at least I've done my best for Sarah and Vicky, and there's independent people have said so. So it makes me feel a lot better. We still got a long, hard struggle ahead, and obviously we will have to look into some of the medical stuff as well, like everybody else.
There's a collective issue around, the findings today relating to all 96 who died, and I'm sure there's unity in terms of the feeling that finally the truth has come out. But if you want to ask any specific questions as to plans for the future or anything at all, just ask away, and I'll direct it to who I think will be most appropriate to answer those specific questions.
My name's Stephen Kelly. I lost my brother Michael at Hillsborough.
My name's Barry Devonside. Our son Christopher was killed.
My name's Stephen Wright, like the Saint. Brother of Graham, John Wright.
My name's Peter Hooton. I was at Hillsborough in 1989 and been involved in the campaign.
Becky Shaw. I lost my mother, Inga Shaw, who was 38.
Sheila Coleman from the Hillsborough Justice Campaign.
I'm Bearcus. I lost my son Peter, he was aged 24.
Kenny Derbyshire, Hillsborough survivor.
Wendy Derbyshire, I'm also a Hillsborough survivor.
Anyone?
Yeah, I want to ask you, what shocked you most today about you sort of knew that before?
I think it'd be different things. I started off by saying what's totally blown me away is that in terms of blood alcohol levels being taken, the thing that's always shocked us since 1989 is the blood alcohol level was taken in a 10-year-old boy. And we thought it couldn't get any worse than that. But today we find that in 2 of the victims, where there was absolutely no blood alcohol level, where they hadn't consumed alcohol at all, their information was then fed into the police national computer to see if they had criminal records in order to create, a smear campaign, really, to blacken their character. The idea of that being done in relation to a victim of something is abhorrent, and it's actually, I thought I was unshockable, but to me, that's been the most shocking thing today. Anyone else want to say anything that's...
I think the thing that's shocked me to me bones was the lack of health and safety around the game, the planning, the risk was, man. There didn't seem to be a contingency plan in place, and you know, as the disaster was unfolding, you know, the thought of policemen standing around not assisting the supporters who were carrying out the saviour of some of the fans. You know, it just goes to show you that the level which football fans were held in that day. You know, they were just, as long as they paid to get in or got your chicken money, that's all you were thought of. So it was disgraceful that there was certainly no contingency plan in place. And as I say, it shocked me, but it certainly didn't surprise me.
What does the HAC feel should happen now in terms of action against those who are named and shamed in the law?
I think it's kind of an agreement on it that clearly, first and foremost, as a matter of immediacy, never mind goodwill, the Attorney General should quash the inquest verdicts in all 96 cases. And he has the power to do that, and he should order fresh inquests. I'd previously said the possibility of substituting a reward, but when you hear of the police actions which were criminal in respect of trying to reverse the Taylor report findings, then there needs to be full inquests into all those who died. And then secondly, there is the clear issue of criminal cases now, because that's what we've seen. We've seen, and I've never, contribute to conspiracies, but it's a clear conspiracy. There was a conspiracy to cover up, and I think it's really important that those criminals are brought to book. Those criminals who corrupted the coroner's inquiry. If you or I did that, we'd be in prison now, and the same rules apply.
In my opinion, the head of the CPS, that's the Crown Prosecution Service, should investigate this disaster for those who changed or amended statements or made other people change their statements or amend them. This is perverting of course of justice, nothing more than that, and they should be brought to book, those individual officers or other parties that were involved with it, and held accountable, as any other member of the public would be.
Tony? Well, I think a lot of it wouldn't end up going out. I mean, the thing is, he was described today as a conduit in it all, and we know that I'm not going to repeat, but basically that that lie began with the police. But nevertheless, he found no fault in it. I don't think, an apology actually means nothing now coming from that man. And I think, you just have to, for anyone who's on Facebook or Twitter who sees the response every time he's on television. But as long as, sort of people watch him, they'll employ him. It wouldn't be who I'd employ.
It's quite aware that the apology from Mr Mackenzie today is one where he's trying to save his career, because his career will go down the pan from today for what he's been involved in and what he did on that particular day on the 19th of April 1989. And his career, as far as I'm concerned, without being vindictive, bitchy or nasty, should end today. Nobody should employ that man at all.
Sorry, could you make a point on that myself or Mackenzie? This is the book that the Hillsborough Independent Panel left us with to read over. There's one word missing on the front of this. The truth. The one statement, sorry. The truth. Kelvin Mackenzie wants to get hold of that and read the truth instead of printing what he said was the truth, which was also lies, which this document proves.
Okay. We've heard no mention today of the role of the West Midlands Police. Has anything salient come to your attention today you'd like to...
I did an interview before with, I think, BBC West Midlands, and I was asked that question, and what I said, that was one disappointment that came, for me, that came from the report today. And obviously we haven't read it, and there might be more information in there, so if there is, then, you know, sort of excuse my comments. But clearly, we have evidence, and we've had evidence for a long time, that they, as investigating officers for all three major inquiries after Hillsborough, they compounded the cover-up. They were the investigating officers. They had a track record, their serious crime squad had a track record for corruption. Let's remember they were the ones that put away the Birmingham Six for 17 years. Their former head of the serious crime squad, Stanley Beachy, was named in the House of Commons by Claire Short in February prior to the disaster in relation to a miscarriage of justice case whereby he had falsified evidence and someone had spent 18 months in a prison. Their expertise was brought into the investigating Hillsborough, and their special expertise was in doctoring evidence and falsifying statements, and that evidence has been put before court before in terms of coercing people to change statements and their persistence in doing that. And we have people on the panel today who, you know, their experiences of being interviewed with the West Midlands Police was heavy-handed, given that they were the bereaved families. So I'd like to think there's more in the report. If there isn't, then I hate to think that they've been let off the hook as well. I really do, because I think that Margaret Thatcher and the Tory government of the day has clearly been let off the hook in this. And I think something lacking. I understand what's been said around the lack of written documentation, but nevertheless, I think that is something that is left wanting from the report.
We have to recognise the role of the panel here today and the work over the last 3 years that they've done. I personally thank Bishop James Jones for what he did. And remembering when I first met him, as I said early on today when you weren't here, that give me a reason why we should trust you when everybody else we've been involved with has kicked us in the backside at blocked doors. Bishop James and his colleagues have done an excellent job, and yes, a lot of it we already knew, and yes, I know of two people who made statements separately on different days in different homes to the West Midlands Police. Both of them, weeks later, no connection other than they know me, rang up the West Midlands Police to say they wanted something else putting in their statements, only to be told, we have no statement from you, we have no record of your statements. What was going on with that? Luke?
A general question to one of the families. Can you describe your emotions when you picked up the report this morning and saw the extent and the detail it went into and how it exonerated all the families? Can you put into words how you were actually feeling when you read those words?
Well, when we first came in today, it was quite overpowering just to be here, quite frightening really. Obviously we've got the book, we haven't had a chance to look. You know, I listened to all that's gone on, and I listened to the Prime Minister, and people said, are you happy, you know, that he's apologised? Personally, to me, he was only a young man when it happened. He can only apologise for his previous people. Yeah, it goes a little somewhere for him to apologise, but at the end of the day, what's happened today and what's been said, we all knew the truth. The good thing now is that everybody will know. But I think everybody knew anyway. But it's just nice that it's here.
I think I feel mixed feelings about it. I mean, on the one hand, obviously, I'm really relieved that Liverpool fans, survivors, the dead, we've all been exonerated. The city of Liverpool's been exonerated, and that was something that was badly, badly needed. However, I can't help thinking that as a young woman of 17 years old when that happened, losing my only parent, I can't understand why it's taken over half of my life to get to this day. And I think that in a so-called civilised and democratic nation, I think that is absolutely outrageous.
You know when something's wrong. You know the way you conduct yourself in society, the way you behave, the way you speak to people. I remember when I was told that our son had been killed, and I went to the temporary mortuary. And when I knocked on the door, this police officer opened the door, and it was built like a block of flats. He'd been deliberately selected because he was expecting trouble from Liverpool supporters. That's blatantly obvious to me. He asked me what did I want. I told him, our son is in here. What's his name? What was he wearing? I gave him his name, his address, my name, my address. I was told him he was wearing a Welsh International rugby shirt. He closed the door behind me, and maybe 12 minutes later he came back out. And he said, there's nobody of that name or that description here. Now I know for a fact, from speaking with Bishop James Jones, that I wasn't the only person that happened to. So it was at that stage at 5 o'clock on the Saturday night, the 15th of April, that they'd already kicked in this self-defence mechanism. As I walked out of the gymnasium, actually onto the road, there must have been 20 or 30 members of the press there, some cameras, people shouting over to me, what do you think of Liverpool supporters urinating on bodies and stealing from the dead? That was at 5 o'clock on the Saturday. It was already up and running then. I didn't envisage what would be printed in the Sun on the Wednesday, being the 19th, if my memory serves me correct. It was then that the defence mechanism for Mr. Reiter and his fellow senior officers and the support for the force itself kicked in. But unfortunately, he had the support, in my opinion, of the coroner and other legal bodies. I sat through the inquest, and I am the only person who sat through it for 80 days. And I saw him on some Saturday mornings when witnesses were giving evidence, and he was doing his damnedest to discredit the people that were giving evidence. Hold on a moment, you're supposed to be objective. You're supposed to listen, ask questions, search out what this person knows or doesn't know. No, that wasn't the case. It was just a rollover all the time from day to day to build up this, if you like, attack on Liverpool supporters, stroke Liverpool people.
Can I just, what might be useful, because you won't have got this from the previous press conferences, that we have survivors here, and I think it would be appropriate, and actually some cross that boundary, like Stephen Wright there, who's a bereaved family and survivor, that it might be useful to if you want to ask any questions of the survivors.
The image that comes to my mind is being at Hillsborough and then ending up in the gymnasium with an injured body bag. Just to say, my brother was marred in the words, thank you, because we have fought for 23 years for this moment, and I've just got this image in my head that he's just saying thank you, because we have never given up on them. We have never ever stopped believing that if you know the truth, you will never ever stop. And we've been proved right.
I think it's just quite important as well. My brother was the last to be identified. He wasn't identified until Sunday. Because I believed he was safe. I reassured myself really he was safe because he was a very experienced football fan. And on the Sunday morning, I went to the phone, and I must have phoned the police from the number that was given out on a number of occasions, only to be reassured 100% all the dead had been identified. I gave a full, detailed description of my brother Michael. It was unmistakably Michael from the description I gave. And again, the police said to me, no, they've all been identified. I rang round all the hospitals, everywhere, trying to reassure my mother and my sister that my brother was safe. I gave up in the end and drove to Sheffield myself, to the Leppings Lane gates, where I had a confrontation with a policeman whose good as arrested me. I was then taken to a church place and where they'd set another sort of centre up. I went through a couple of hours again of questioning. Then to be going asked to go and look at a couple of bodies. I said to the police, what are we all going to look at a couple of bodies for? I said, all the dead have been identified. He said, no, there's a man and a woman. I said, what the hell do you want to go and look at a woman for? I said, I've come here to look for my brother. The police then went through this process, and when I reflect on it now, it was a box-ticking exercise for the police. They were setting their game out, that, you know, all these lads and girls who'd been here the day before were going to be blamed. And I then had a horrible thing to do, to phone my mother a couple of hours later and say my brother was dead, after reassuring him when I left Liverpool that he was safe. But the police had done a job. They ticked all their boxes. The one thing they won't be able to do is tick this box, because this box tells exactly what happened today and what then police allowed to happen. And then try to, again, tick their boxes to make sure that they didn't get into any court sort of trouble.
Talking about potential criminal prosecutions,
Yes.
And obviously you've read what's in the report. Any particular individuals who spring to mind who you would suggest could be liable to further action in terms of what you've read?
Wouldn't be into individuals. We've never been into condemning. We might have condemned individual actions, but we've always acknowledged the corporate nature and the collective responsibility of agencies. When there's the responsibility for the Hillsborough disaster was South Yorkshire Police Authority, it lay with them, and Peter Wright, the Chief Constable, who is now dead. I don't think the answer to this is in singling out. Obviously, in terms of criminal cases, you'd have to single out their actions or failure to act on the day. But I think this is a bigger issue. This goes to the heart of a government covering up.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I've got to go pretty soon, so I want to start writing this and give a good kick into a lot of people.
Not us, please.
I actually want to ask you a final question. You know, I don't want to go about the different groups, etc., but there's been a lot of kind of criticisms, there's been a lot of anger, there's been a lot of accusations, mostly wrong over the years about yourselves. Today you must feel totally vindicated that you kept the Hillsborough Justice campaign going.
We do, because Brian, you know, I had a brief conversation yesterday and you reminded me of all those years ago when, you know, I used to hound you when you worked on the Echo, trying to get you to do something because you had the problems from the paper. And I came to you in relation to Deborah Martin and Anne Williams. And when we first met Deborah Martin, we came to you and you did that story. And I know how long ago that was. Before the campaign was formed, but nevertheless, the key players are still all around. And then we took the judicial review. We took that evidence to London, and they rejected it. And that was the political climate of the time. And there've been very dark days because, and you're right, this should be a day for unity. You know, as far as I'm concerned, this is day zero. That's the way it should be. And I think that there are people here who should feel proud. John Glover came here today in a wheelchair, and that to me said it all. For me, that was the biggest thing anyone could have given me today on top of this, because that man, you know, was my driving force, has been my driving force for 23 years, because what I saw when I was with him in the coroner's court and anything else where I was with him, was, you know, your average working class Liverpool man saying, that's not right, and then going away and finding out. He just had a sense of right and wrong, and when he didn't know the system, but he knows it now, and he learned it pretty quickly. And yes, people do feel, and rightly feel vindicated, that so much of the report today actually draws on the evidence we found. It was us that went to Dr. Ian West, the pathologist, and handed that to the High Court in London to say these people could have been alive. His evidence was rubbish there. So yes, there is a feeling of that, and it is sometimes. There's always got to be people who will be prepared to stand apart, and it's not easy when you're part of a big group. So I would like to say the groups that have stood apart, the individuals that have stood apart and then formed other groups. Instead of knocking them, just look why they did it, and actually give them a little bit of credit for being brave enough to stand apart, because that's how leaders are made, and they're only leaders if people follow them. Peter?
Can I just say something? It wasn't a football tragedy as such, it was a human tragedy, and I don't distinguish between groups, because we did Fields Van Furlong Road for the HFSG. We also have been involved in the Hillsborough Justice campaign. I was at Hillsborough. I don't see it as factionalism. I see it, like to quote Disraeli from the 19th century, justice is truth in action. We've had the truth today. We knew the truth. We knew most of the truth. We saw it with our own eyes. And that's why we've been so passionate. That's why we haven't given up. And that's why, as a fan, I'm going to continue. Because it's not over yet. It's not over yet. We've got the truth in the document. But we need to see action.
Barry, sorry, Peter, could you just say, because it is just an example of how you brought that into action in terms of, and how you've brought cities, we've helped bring cities together. I just think that's an
if you look at the Justice campaign, you look at the Justice Tonight tour that we've done in the last year, it's brought football fans together. It's the one issue, because sometimes things are more important than football. It transcended football. And we've had absolutely magnificent, from our fiercest rivals, Manchester United and Everton, we've had some tremendous support. We had Eric Cantona on stage in Lyon. The Stone Roses took us on a world tour with them. We've just had unprecedented support. And if you look at Facebook and Twitter feeds, some of the messages from yesterday and today was we're with you, 100%, West Ham fans, Chelsea fans, all fans from all around the country. It's only the negatives that are picked up on in the press. I'd appeal to people to mention that in terms of the fact that football fans came together. It was a monumental thing for that to happen.
I think there's a sadness about today. All of the families have trodden different paths to get to the position that we're at today. And instead of being all as one, there's 3 or 4 different groups, and I feel I'm sad in that regard. Yes, it's fine to go down different paths when you've all got the same aims, but surely together when we're here, it should have been us one.
I agree with that. I agree totally with you.
The word vindication is being used a lot today, but there's also a sense of resentment that 23 years on, you sat in a church in Liverpool and all the old bad feelings that you had are being reawakened. You should never have to wait this long. Is that the...
Yeah, definitely, because I've come with my daughters today and I said I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. I can see where I was sitting on the day with my husband. He was alive then, obviously. And I felt as though I was going back 23 years and having to relive it again, and that's horrendous. Just on its own, was absolutely a horrible feeling.
Can I just say, watching the families, for me, and I've said this, quite a few times today, we all know that the disaster was avoidable, but it happened, it was a fact. For me, the unforgivable thing is that the last 23 years have been totally unnecessary, and the damage and suffering and the deaths we've seen were unnecessary, and that is the unforgivable element. So for people to say sorry, that is fine, but let them acknowledge that everything else after Hillsborough, that was unavoidable and that was unnecessary. and it's a long way to come back, and it has awoken things for families. I've seen it since this date was announced. Just on a daily basis, I've seen just a growing tension.
Can I say something from the survivor point of view? I was there on that day, and very shortly afterwards somebody at work was telling me what had happened, and I felt so angry. I thought, I was there, I saw things that you never want to see in your whole life. I was 23 at the time, and you're telling me what happened, but that was the environment. People thought that they knew because they'd read the papers, they'd seen things on the television, and they thought they knew better than I did, and that made me very, very angry. And also on the day, I remember looking down at the dead, because I was sitting in the stand above where the dead were, and I saw one man, and he was quite a big bloke. You wouldn't have expected him to have been caught up in it, really, and his face was still uncovered. And I remember looking at him and thinking, they're not going to get away with this, because there's too many people involved. I've seen what happened, and you can't, hush it up. Well, they've managed to for a long time, but eventually people have listened, and we're not militants, we're not peculiar people. We're just ordinary people who went to a football match and saw things that were absolutely horrific, and they will live with us forever.
Can I just say, there's always good that comes out of bad things. If you don't take anything positive, it's always a totally negative experience and a waste of time. And the good thing for the Hillsborough Justice campaign that came out of this awful thing is that Wendy and Kenny met and married. And that, to me, Kenny is our chair. I don't know if Kenny wants to say it.
Yeah, I was also there on the day. I'm a Hillsborough survivor. And I felt like a great weight to lift off my shoulders today with the panel's decision. I'm not blaming, or the findings we found it. I'm not blaming the supporters. We've had this labelled for 23 years, carrying us around with us. And that was a great relief. And the panel decision decided it wasn't our fault. Oh, that is hard to come to for the last 23 years, been labelled with that. And that stuck to us, and that hurts most of all.
I'd like to emphasise Kenny's saying, I couldn't speak about Hillsborough for approximately 10 years. I couldn't speak about it because I was in the crush outside, and I was one of the people who was pleading with the police to open the gates. So I've lived with that for many years, but it's just, when you see a report like that, that puts it into perspective of, because you blame yourself, you're haunted by it. Well, I know a lot of other Liverpool fans were doing the same because it was so bad outside. But as Kenny says, it's like a lead weight being lifted off your shoulders, because it's actually haunted a lot of people for a lot of years, because we were insistent when we got into the ground at 3:02 that they had to open the gates. And I think the report exonerates everyone.
I think that as well, just to add to that, because what that shows a little bit is the trauma suffered, and for years, because of survivor guilt, I'm just perversely feeling lucky to be alive. So many survivors have never sought help, and what the Justice Campaign has enabled has been that a forum or an environment where survivors felt they could come forward. And part of our work is in helping in whatever way we can. We're not experts in the field of trauma, but what we will do is there's empathy that can occur through fellow survivors, but also we use our funds to assist people in having psychological treatments, and that is ongoing. And it's amazing over the years how you think it might go, but it comes back. And people, and a lot of them are from people, they were married, had children, never told their wives maybe that they were at Hillsborough. Something happens and it occurs, and that's one concern we have following on from today, that stuff is going to open up in that. And I know that there is allegedly systems in place at the City Council. I've spoken, and hopefully that will be ongoing. And also in terms of the campaign, and Luke hit on it, you know, it's not about, for us it's not about targeting individuals, but we will be contacting the Attorney General and applying our pressure in terms of hoping he quashes the inquest verdict, and we will have a legal team, people who have advised us. There have been good people over the years who have advised and have done work for free. Good people will always do that. They'll use their skills and utilise their skills, and that's what they have to offer. To see where we go from here politically again, and not to hark back to it, it's really sad, but we were hoping that we would be able to sit and families would be able to access Michael Mansfield and Charles Faulkner, but we've been told that's not the case, so it seems that the divisions are continuing. That is a real shame, because you know the power of presenting a united front, but nevertheless we do have a regard and have to protect those who are left otherwise unprotected. So we will be doing that. So the campaign is ongoing, and Peter makes the point. The fans have been a complete vindication today, but it's for them to decide their future. It's for too long people have decided their lives and their future. For 23 years they've lived with the legacy of someone deciding for them. So it's for them to decide. And you don't know, people need to investigate this, that there could well be arguments for criminal cases from a survivor's perspective as well. That's something that hasn't really been looked into. So, has anyone got any other questions?
So just when you said just when you said there about criminal cases from survivors' perspectives, tell us roughly what you mean by that.
Well, clearly, you know, they're interested parties in this proceedings. Some of the issues, some of the activities that the police engaged in impacted directly on survivors in terms of the lies told. And given that that was in, their actions were criminal, then there could well be some recourse on the part of survivors. I mean, this is me talking entirely off the top of my head now, but that's just from what I've heard today. They've always been interested parties. Strictly speaking, I'd go so far to argue as they should have, you know, had access to this before, because in relation to the way the other 85 interested parties had access to it, because they're the ones who form the major, they're the ones who were criticised and condemned by the lies. And they were the ones effectively held responsible for the dead. So that is something that needs investigating, and obviously we will support fans in that the way we have done.
I think for 23 years, I've always had him in a legal case, and every time I got refused, I always seemed to find another legal avenue to take him through, you know. And then you might wait 8 months and get a report, but I always seem to manage to get him through the system, even though the system kept bouncing me off one wall to the other. And I just kept, it was that was keeping me going, and knowing that I'm right and you're wrong, and I wanted them to admit that I'm right and they're wrong.
Something that's always come across from you is your love for Kevin. What does this say about a mother's love? Because plenty of people would have decided 10, 15 years, that's enough, I need to go back to normality, whatever normality is now. But what to say about your love for your son?
I think, obviously, I think everyone loved the children. I think what it was with Kevin, it was when we attended the inquest, and then they told me all these horrible things about Kevin. And Kevin was the worst of the 96, and he was the worst case of traumatic asphyxia. And he was the only little boy that had too many inquests on him. And he was blue and bloated and covered in petechial hemorrhages. And I can remember sitting in that inquest court thinking, you didn't look like that, Kevin. You looked lovely when I said goodbye to you. But at the time, I was thinking perhaps, because I couldn't remember Kevin in the early stages without a photograph, and I was thinking perhaps when I said goodbye to him, I just wanted to see that he looked nice and that my mind was playing tricks on me. So after the inquest, I started delving, because the big mistake the police made that day was they took me into a side room, and they sat me down and they told me that they had something to tell me, and it's going to upset me. And they told me that when Kevin was moved into the gymnasium, he, with a special WPC, he'd opened his eyes and called for his mum at 4 o'clock. Well, I started to cry, but then I thought, I had mother's instinct that day about 4 o'clock. I had this feeling Kev wasn't going to come home. But then they said to me, we weren't going to tell you this, but we thought we'd better. So the first thing I said to them, well, where's the police lady? And they said, she's not here today. But when you get into the inquest court and you hear Kevin's injuries, you'll realise that there's no way Kevin could have spoke mum. And it was probably body wind this policewoman heard. And she was only young, not in the force very long, and she was off her head. So we went into the inquest court, and then we heard the evidence from the pathologist, and it was horrific. And they never used the police lady's evidence because the pathologist's evidence was so strong. Kevin had a neck injury, but he said their neck injury was so bad that the little boy couldn't have spoken. So the coroner didn't want to run the poor lady down. It was probably body wind. And then a couple of days later they had another inquest on Kevin, and more medical evidence came in. So I decided to track this policewoman down, and I wrote to South Yorkshire Police, and I found her in 1991. And when she came to see me to tell me what she'd done for Kevin, I realised then that he was alive, and he did call for my name. Then I needed forensic then. So I decided to start talking to the forensic pathologists. And after spending hours and hours as a forensic pathologist in Guy's Hospital, I realised that Kevin's injuries were mild and he was savable. And then I was one of the 6 judicial review families. We got a case together and we submitted to the Attorney General, I think in 1991, and he refused us. And then we judicially reviewed his answer in 1993, and that was another stitch up. So then we had nowhere else to go, so I couldn't rest because I thought, I know what you've done to Kevin. So I decided then to write to the documentaries, and Roger Cook came on the scene, and he did Kevin's case in 1994, and he tracked the police lady down, and she took part on it. He tracked an ambulance driver that, you know, the off-duty policeman was so adamant about. And I started uncovering more fraud, more lies, more perverting the course of justice in Kevin's inquest. It was getting worse and worse. So after the Cook report, because it got the publicity, it gave me another chance then. You know, the government sat up and they said I could go. I had a parliamentary debate. Sir Nicholas Lyle was the Attorney General at the time, and he said in the debate that if I submitted all the evidence again, he would gladly look at Kevin's inquest, Kevin's case. I was asking again for another inquest because Kevin wasn't dead by 3:15, and he didn't die from traumatic asphyxia because of all the medical reports I had, and I wanted his death certificate put right. And he promised me this, and I even kept out, and a message come from the office to keep out of McGovern's drama because it would jeopardise what I did with him. So I had to drop out of Jimmy's drama because I'd been filming with Jimmy for quite a long time. Because I thought, well, Jimmy can put Kevin all over the telly, but he can't give me the inquest that I so badly want. So then, not long after the Hillsborough drama, I think it was about 6 months after, I got my letter, my answer, and the Attorney General, it didn't even come from him. It came from the Secretary General, Spence, not in the interest of justice that Kevin should get another inquest. And I was so angry because I thought, you set me up. You kept me out the drama because it was such a strong case, just to refuse me again. So then it was, the drama came and went, and obviously we got publicity again. And it was the European Courts of Human Rights, the new ruling came out, the right to life, and under Section 2, and it related to Kevin. The barrister contacted me, and the right to life means because he died in the hands of the state, he was entitled to a thorough investigation to determine how he died and what he died from. And Kevin hadn't had that. So I had to submit them back to the Attorney General, which was Mr. Goldsmith then, to get into Europe. knowing that Goldsmith would refuse me. So I submitted another memorial into the Attorney General, and it took him about 6 months again, not in the interest of justice. And I used to say it is in the interest of justice that Kevin gets his inquest. Then I submitted into Europe, and Europe kept me waiting for 2 years. And I got the answer just before the 20th anniversary, which they were saying was, I was out of time, but I wasn't out of time. My last legal submission in this country was the Attorney General, and we submitted well before the 3 months was off. But what they were saying to me, they wouldn't accept the Attorney General's process as a legal avenue in this country. And I thought, well, he's the only man that I can go to for a new inquest. But so I was out of time because they said I should have submitted after the Lord Justice Stuart Smith scrutiny. But they just didn't stamp on admissible. They did write me a letter saying that go through this country again to ask for a new inquest. So I was going to go, but then the panel was placed. So then I've been waiting really because I wanted that panel. But then I had a debate I had the e-petition, and then I thought if they can have a debate on Margaret Thatcher, I'm going to see if I can get a debate on my son. He's more important than her. And it just whizzed off on the internet, and I was absolutely overwhelmed. And then that gave us the chance then for the debate which we had in February. And I wanted that debate in February because I wanted things to come out to let them know what they'd done to Kevin. And in that debate, obviously, this is where I was up to now, that Dominic Grieve promised he would look at all Kevin's stuff again, and in it with an open mind. And now, after this report, it's actually going back now. This report will go to my barrister next week, and obviously, as soon as possible, I'll get the draft in, seeking another inquest into the death of my son.
Obviously, it's been said that as many as 41 of the victims could have survived had they been given the proper treatment. Yeah. And a lot of the families, that's going to be hard to take today, is it?
That's right.
They'd be wondering. Yeah. But for you, it's slightly different in that you've known all
along.
Yeah,
well, I mean, 8 years I was. And that was when the forensic men turned round to me. I mean, when we sent for the autopsy photographs, I never saw them. But we had reports on them, and he wasn't blue and bloated. So I was right. My son was lovely when I said goodbye to him. There wasn't a marking on him. And as it worked out as well, he was one of the mildest injured, and Kevin was savable, and he did die at 4 o'clock. And I knew that 8 years after the disaster, and that hurt me. And then, I thought, God, he could have been saved, and I was angry. Why didn't they let the paramedics on? Just a rubber tube. But then I had to wrap my head around it, like some of the families are going to have to.
I'm very shocked. I am.
Yeah.
I didn't expect. Quite frankly, I didn't expect any of them could be saved. I wasn't expecting that to come out. And I think that out of everything, that's what I've found really upsetting. I was told by a witness that my brother come from Bromsgrove in Worcestershire. He didn't come from Liverpool, but he was a season ticket holder. And I do feel strongly that Hillsborough did not just affect Liverpool and Merseyside, it affected the whole country, and I'm very passionate about that. My brother was at Heysel, he was a season ticket holder, he was a committed Liverpool fan, he would travel to the home games midweek, he'd finish work and then go, and then he would go to all the home and away matches. And I found a witness, and a witness told me that they found him at 20-4 on the football pitch, vomiting. I was one of the lucky ones. I had Andrew's body file, and I had a lot of photographs, especially of the mortuary. Andy's body number was number 50. However, reading a witness statement, it appeared that Andrew was given body number 50 before he was certified dead, and also Andrew had got a black bin liner over his head, again before he was certified dead. And I mentioned this to Lord Justice Stuart Smith, and he completely ignored it. I know, I think one of my statements was altered, which I'd raised from the very, very beginning as well, but I'm very shocked at 41, that's virtually half of them, you know.
Do you mind if I ask your name and also your brother's full name?
Sorry, I'm Louise Brooks. I'm the sister of Andrew Mark Brooks.
Thanks. There's been some conjecture that Kevin's case may actually go forward and be seen as a test case for all the other inquests. Have you been given any more indication as to that?
No, not really. But I do know, working with the barristers over the years, they always said they won't let him through, Anne. I knew, you know, they used to do the work for me, and we'll submit it, but you're not going to get your inquest. And I used to say, oh no, submit it though, because at least I can say, because I'll always wonder, you know, I'll go and exhaust that avenue, and I'll find another one, and I always did. But the barrister always used to say that if Kevin gets his inquest, he's going to open the floodgates, and this is why they've blocked me all these years. And the thing that used to upset me was Edward Fitzgerald QC, who I am indebted to because he's waived lots of fees for me and did a lot free for me, and all the forensic pathologists never charged me. I've got numerous reports from the top forensic men in Guys, and the latest guy, Nathaniel Carey, who's placed now. He said that if Kevin, because under Section 13 of the Coroner's Act, I've got all the evidence, you know, and what it says under Section 13 of the Coroner's Act, if by new evidence since the inquest, insufficiency of inquiry, fraud, all these points, and I had all these, and it says at the bottom, it is necessary and desirable in the interest of justice you get a new inquest. And I'm thinking, I've got everything they're asking, and then they bang it back at me, not in the interest of justice. And what Mr. Fitzgerald had always said, if Kevin Hunter died at Hillsborough, you would have probably got your inquest years ago, and that used to really, really upset me, because I thought, you know, it's not right. He had 2 inquests on him. The 2 were different stories. Then after tracking all the witnesses down, I uncovered a 3rd story. So the jury never knew what happened to Kevin, and this is why I've been so adamant that you know, I want the records put straight. That, you know, my little boy died at Hillsborough football, at the Hillsborough football ground. He didn't die from traumatic asphyxia, and my little boy, I feel, was unlawfully killed. Now, they had mentioned, the barristers used to say, you know, that if Kevin's case was the strongest, and they could use him as a test case, but this was quite a few years ago, and because they'll never open all the 96 inquests, because they're the longest running in history. I've heard rumours, I don't know, but I know Dominic Grieve, he'll be waiting for my submission now, and the Prime Minister, it was raised in the House today. But I mean, that doesn't bother me one way or the other. All I know, I hope, well, if he does, you know, get that verdict struck, and then it affects everyone, because I can't see that they can give Kevin an inquest and strike it down without striking it down for the rest of the families, because they were unlawfully killed like Kevin. And I've always said, the pathologist that lied about Kevin, and I mean, I told the panel this. I mean, I said to the forensic man, he's lied. He said, oh yes. I said, how do I prove he's lied? He said, your autopsy photographs and my autopsy report don't match the inquest papers, and what, he said, all those injuries and all the markings were on Kevin. They weren't on the autopsy photographs. So we know that's a lie. And then my argument was then, well, this doctor did 14 bodies. Now, if he's lied about Kevin, he's lied about the other 13. He's unsafe. You know, and this is what I used to say. You know, I've always thought, you know, for Kev, his top priority is mine. But I've always been instructed that Kevin's case would open the gates for everyone else. So I've always had the other families in my mind. You know, but obviously I have to do what I had to do for Kevin. But you're hoping, you know, that, you know, we would all get justice. But after today, I feel that when I do submit, that, I mean, he's got to give me my inquest. I mean, I'm going to give him all the evidence under Section 13 and more. So I do feel, I mean, I'm not getting too excited, that when I submit to Dominic Grieve, he's going to send it back to the divisional courts and they're going to recommend a new inquest into Kevin's death. If he doesn't, well, what's the point of all this today? And also, I will judicially review him, because that's another legal avenue, and I've always had that in the back of my mind. I will raise the funds and I will just judicially review the Attorney General, but after today I don't think it will come to that. But I always say I always had that, I've got another legal avenue yet. And I kept thinking, I've always had somewhere to go, and I thought I'll carry on until I exhaust it, till they prove I'm right, you're wrong. And I've had all the witnesses, the police lady, the off-duty policeman, all their statements have gone to the Attorney General. They've been bullied into changing statements. His inquests were riddled with corruption and perverting the course of justice.
I had a
suppressing of evidence.
Yeah, my case though was the police officer who allegedly tried to save my brother lied to my parents, and they tried to obstruct me from finding one of the main men who tried to save my brother. He actually said, his words were, "You don't want to contact him, he's a rough diamond and he comes from the roughest housing estate in Liverpool." And my mum said, "I don't care where he comes from. He tried to save my son, I need to contact him." And it went on for years and years. And when I received Andrew's body file, I received the witness statements, and I looked at the address on the back of the witness statement, and I got a map, and I located his road where he lived, and he comes from one of the richest places in Merseyside, and that was it for me then. And I then contacted, I wrote a letter to him, and I found him and his family were absolutely wonderful, and my parents were so pleased to have met him. And I can't, all the photographs I've got, this police officer, he was meant to have been Superman that day. He was meant to have, you know, done all this for my brother. And do you know what? Of all the photographs I've got, all I've got is a photograph of this police officer with his arm round a doctor. He's not doing anything. And this rough diamond, allegedly, who did nothing, he was the one who was giving my brother the kiss of life. It was just, so I really truly believe that this police officer was told for our family not to have any contact with Brian, you know. And I'm so pleased that I just pursued it, because without him, you know, I don't know. I learned a lot from that. Otherwise, this police officer would he just did not want us to have any contact at all. And then within the last 2 days, I've actually found there were 4 people altogether with my brother's stretcher. Brian was at the front, and then there were these other 3. And I lived in Liverpool from 1997 to 2000. I deliberately moved to Liverpool to pursue this, and basically, well, it was just unbelievable what I found. And these photographs, this guy had got a broken arm, and I did a big spread in the Liverpool Echo trying to locate this witness, and I didn't get anything. And it turned out these 2 people come from Exeter. And after the documentary on Monday night, I put some photos on Facebook, and they've contacted me. Unfortunately, the one lad out of the 3, he sadly passed away in 1999. And I'm really sad about that, because I really believe that the police obstructed me from finding these people who tried to save my brother, you know.
I have a question for Anne. Obviously, your knowledge of what's happened in the last over the last 23 years, and your knowledge of what happened in that day and beyond that day, is like practically encyclopedic.
Yeah.
And you probably haven't had a great deal of time to read thoroughly what you've received today, but based on what you've been told, is there anything today that you've learned that's new?
No. But I mean, well, there is, you know, we found out about the Sun newspaper and things like that, but we always knew it, sort of, you know, I mean, I believe for years that the story came from an officer with pips on his shoulders, and then we knew about the better sin.
Didn't expect them to be PNC, though, did we? That's another thing.
And then, I mean, the way they've cleared, I mean, we've always known our Liverpool fans. I mean, they were the ones that helped Kevin, carried him. I mean, that's what I've always said. They did the evacuation that day. They give our children comfort. They took them down to the North Stand, but there was no care for them. They were dumped all over the place, and there was no oxygen. There was nothing. If Kevin had got oxygen, he'd be alive today. You know, why did they haven't really given us an answer why the police cordoned off the 44 ambulances. You know, I still want to know why. I haven't read all the report, I don't know if that's in it, but that's one of the things I'd like to know, why. When at that Spine Copper corner where the ambulances came in, I mean, our Kev was there because the ambulance passed him, and a lot of other people, and they could see all these people dying and injured. The people that made the cordon across to stop the ambulances, these police officers. And I cannot understand why they wouldn't let them on, and they told the ambulance driver they were still fighting out there. They were dying by their feet. I still can't understand that, you know, so whether it's in this report, I don't know. And there's a few little things, but I think I know an awful lot about it, and everything about Hillsborough. But I think the report today was excellent. I mean, I was wary of the panel at first, and I think it was because of that Lord Justice Smith's scrutiny, because he was such a horrible man to us, and the way he stitched us up. And then I thought, oh, is this going to be another stitch up? And as I got to know them, and I got to know the way they treated you, and I've not been very well over a few months. I'm on the mend now, and they were coming to my house for documents, and they really cared, and get yourself better, Anne, and the way they've looked after us. And I thought, these people are so kind to us. They can't be two-faced. I'm going to stitch us up. And I felt very confident in the last year, meeting the panel, that they were going to do us, you know, justice. But today I'm actually overwhelmed. I didn't know we were going to get this much. And you're always wondering how they were going to do it and which way they were going to do it. But, you know, I was look forward to sitting and reading that report.
Part of the, this body tissue which was found, I was one of the families who was contacted completely out of the blue in December, and I really can't explain how I felt. It was, that it wasn't Andrew's body tissue, but, I had to wait a few weeks to know that. And one of the thoughts, what went through my mind was, if it was Andrew's, that body tissue should have been buried with him. And I had to make a decision of, if it is Andrew's body tissue, what would you like done with that? And I don't think any family should ever have been put in that position from the beginning. I haven't had to make that decision, luckily, but it's just, every area has been completely corrupt, You just couldn't trust anybody. But I think the panel, and I think all the groups, all the families have been absolutely fantastic. I really do. I think for 23 years everybody's been amazing. And I think I found it difficult as well because I live over, 100 miles away, even though I did live here for 3 years. But I can't fault anybody, I'll be honest, I really can't.
But David Cameron has admitted today, and this is what I've always said, we had to deal with two issues, and that's what was cruel. We lost our children, and to lose a child is the worst thing that can happen to you. And your whole life's turned upside down, and you're trying to grieve for this child, but you don't know how he died, and then and then all the lies of Hillsborough. So we've had two issues, and I think I've always said that's been cruel. Two issues to deal with, and it's when 8 years. I mean, I've done all my crying. I've gone through all my illnesses, finding out, what happened to Kevin. And then when I found out, and I'm indebted to the forensic men really, because Dr. Ian West, who was the top man at Guy's, you know, Robert Maxwell's, Babes in the Wood, King's Cross, you couldn't go to anyone higher. He spent hours with me. And I used to ring him up and say to him, I've got something else, Dr. West, come down now, come down. And I'd sit in his office for about 4 hours. And I mean, that guy must have been a £500 an hour man. And I never charged me. And he'd say, you know where I am when I'm needed. And I am indebted to them because they explained, I've had models shown of Kevin's little neck injuries, and you know, explaining that he still could have spoken, and they explained everything. And then when I got to, I came more at peace, and I thought, and you can wrap your head around it. And I came at peace, and it was then I changed. I did change in my attitude, that I took the system on then. This isn't Kevin. This is you lot for what you've done to my little boy. And it made me stronger in one respect. And I learnt to mourn for Kevin. And even now, you know, anything like legally, I detached him from it. Because, you know, it wasn't Kev. I'm submitting to them for what they did to Kev. And I met the police lady who I'd met in 1991, and I met her again just before the debate in February, and we did a piece for Granada Reports. And I was quite surprised at myself, because she came, and I was nervous because I hadn't seen her for a few years. You know, I didn't bother her. She told, give me her statements, told me what she'd done for Kev. And after the memorial was refused, she said she needed to move on. Well, I met her in a cafe in Sheffield where they were going to film, and I thought I was all right. And I can remember her coming up to me and said, oh, Anne, I'm so sorry. It's bringing it back. And I said, no, Deborah, it's never gone away. But when they started to film us, and they started filming her, and she started talking about Kevin and about the little boy, and he opened his eyes and he murmured the word mum, and then he fell over the railing, and I was going to vomit. And it just all, I thought, because I've detached him for so long, but seeing her and listening to her, because she was the last person to deal with, it all came back. I had detached him, but Deborah is a big part, and it all came back. You know, I thought I was going to collapse. But honestly, I managed to pull myself out, and I realised that was a shock. I didn't know my body was going to react like that. But I say I've always sort of detached him, and I've been fighting the system, you know, and hopefully now, you know, we're going. The thought of having to wake up in the morning and think, you know, I don't have to do anything on Hillsborough, because, you know, I'm always submitting stuff to barristers and sorting files out. I'm sick to death of files. And, you know, you can just think, oh, I can do what I like today. And I've done it now. He's got his death certificate. He's at peace, and I'm at peace. I can't wait till I can put my little boy to peace, because I want a life. You know, we're all getting older. I've got 2 lovely other children, and they've given me 3 grandchildren. And the little boy, whose birthday today, he's my daughter's youngest, Finley. He's 4 today. And he's a spitting image of Kevin. Kevin, I think God's given me Kevin back in this little boy. And we always thought that perhaps, with it being Finn's birthday today, that it was a good omen. And I think it has been. You know, we'll never forget Finley's 4th birthday now. You know, he'll be running around in his Spider-Man outfit now. You know, and I just can't wait for this. Because I'm tired. I'll admit I'm tired, but I know if any other legal avenue, I wouldn't walk away, because you see, when you get to a stage like you're going up legal avenues and they're bouncing you from one wall to the other, and then, you know, you have a little rest, and then there's another legal avenue. When he said to go to Europe, I said, well, I've got to go, because if I don't go, in another 5 years' time, you know, you get tired, but then you start pulling and getting on with your life. I'll always regret that, and I'll always wonder, well, if I didn't go into Europe, they might have given me that. So I knew I couldn't live with it. I had to carry on for my own peace of mind, because I would have always wondered. Well, if anybody else doesn't want it, I mean, these are two survivors, you know, that have worked very close.
There's other people waiting there.
Yeah, there's other people at the moment, and these are two survivors in my group. Does anyone want to speak to Peter or... no, so I brought them along as well, because we're mainly survivors anyway in our little group.
Survivors obviously completely exonerated. How does that feel? Peter, from the Justice campaign just before, described it as being as like a lead weight being off his shoulders. How does it feel to you, having seen your efforts and the efforts of all the other Liverpool fans there that day called into question for so long, to be completely absolved from blame and to actually be credited for your efforts? How does that feel today?
Well, you know, I just think it's what I've said all along. I feel like victim number 42, to be honest with you. For the 41 that could have been saved, I was number 42 that was saved. And I know that the actions, certainly of Dr. John Ashton and others, I don't know who carried me out of the pens, but I know that it was Liverpool supporters who were in the pens that carried me out. And to listen to David Cameron today, I couldn't help but think that this country's missed a trick. And the trick that they've missed is that the actions of Liverpool supporters that day in performing the rescue was the finest example of spontaneous humanity that this country's ever witnessed. And they never got on it because they were too busy covering the backs of those that should have performed the rescue anyway. So that's how I feel, and I think it's as much as it's time to get to the bottom of those that died needlessly on that day, and the actions of all those that took part in the disgraceful cover-up and that. I think it's also time for this country to recognise that the rescue was performed by the people who were in the pens and who were watching the match at the time. And for me, I woke up this morning to Steve Rotherham on the television, followed by Dr. John Ashton. And my first thought was, what's he doing in London? Because he was in the studio. And then to listen to him again, I was just made up to see him because I know he put his hands to me behind the Leppens Lane that day. And I was made up to hear him, but I was surprised to find that he was in London. You know, the one thing that's gone through my mind today is that the things that he said in the early years, he got vilified for. You know, he was actually called a liar by the police and the other rescue services. And I know for a fact that he's not. He saved lives then, Jay. And for me, there's a fella who would deserve to be knighted for what he's done. And it's the example that he's shown in you know, reacting to what's happened in front of him and then, you know, organising it so that lives are saved. But, you know, that's another story. The first priority here today is that those that could have been saved, you know, have recognised that their lives, you know, that they could have lived the life that I've lived since.
I think, sorry, from my aspect, sorry, my name's Dean. For the Dean Harris. Yeah. I think it's for the first time we'll walk outside this building and into the, you know, the open air, and actually the sense of relief is going to be just huge. I mean, we've got to think it's been 23 years for the families, survivors, and everyone else that was deeply involved there. We've had this cloud hanging over us for all that time. And when I personally go outside of this building, I know that the weight is going to be completely lifted from me, and speaking to family back home, the sense of not joy, but just relief from family and everyone who knows the impact that Hillsborough's made on so many lives is just immense. So today is, without question, one of the biggest days in my life. Having lived like that for 23 years from the age of 16, it's one of the biggest moments ever, and the relief is just absolutely immense for everyone here. And it completely exonerates everything that was previously said about every survivor, every fan that was in that ground that day, and the victims like Kevin, Anne's Kevin, who've had their name dragged through the mud for all these years. And eventually now we walk out not celebrating, but with a smile on our face, knowing that all the campaigning, it's been worthwhile. We've got there in the end. We've done it.
I'd just like to add one thing which I've always said. Hillsborough could have happened to any football team, any supporter and any fan that day. Whoever got that short straw and who ended up in Leppings Lane, it could have happened to them. And I really feel so strongly about that. When there's all these jokes going on about they all killed themselves and everything, I get so angry because that could have been them, that could have been their family, it could have been any football team that day, you know.
That's okay.
I need to go actually, I've got an appointment.
No, I'll give you a ring. Are you going to the vigil? You're not, I'll see you down there.
I know everyone